Chapter 1 Family Dinner. Arfk! I bellowed as I chased after the little munchkins that hadn't left me alone for most of the day. You better hope your little legs can carry you faster than that, or I'm gonna getcha. Ha ha ha! Children's laughter was the only response as they both little ones tried to run faster than their little bodies would carry them. It only took a few more strides until I caught up with them and gave them their due punishment. Look out! You've awakened the tickle monster. After that statement began their consequences. Uncle Topher stop he. They both said back to me, but it was too late. They deserved a few more seconds. After that time was up, sigh, all right, fine, I said as I stopped the punishment. Before they could scurry off somewhere, I reached down and picked them both up with one in each arm. Let's go get you two washed up for dinner before your mom starts yelling at me. Both children looked at each other for a second before the smaller one looked up at me and said, Come on, Uncle Topher. Just a couple more minutes. Dinner isn't even ready yet. No can do, buckaroo. Your mother tasked me with getting you two cleaned up while she sets the table. We don't want your mom angry with me now, do we? I tried to give them both my best parent glare, but it probably came off as more of a curious eyebrow raise based on their snickers. Fian. They both huffed in annoyance and settled in for the shoulder ride they were getting to the restroom. Uncle Topher, are you scared of Mom? The older one jabbed, trying to scheme a few more minutes of playtime out of me. Now that's a hefty accusation, little Anna. One day you'll learn that discretion is the better part of valor. I replied, which was definitely not a deflection to the question. What does disorientation mean? The younger one sounded out. It means that he's a scaredy cat. Anna oh so helpfully pointed out. Oh, how I miss when they were younger and got distracted by big words. Thankfully the restroom was in sight by now. Oh look, here we are. No more time for questions, so go wash up. And be sure to actually use soap, Josh. I'm watching you, I said as I put them both on the ground and not so gently pushed them in the direction of the sink. That was the end of that line of questioning as they both washed up and we all headed to the dinner table where the sounds of dishes clanking could be heard. Turned out to be a great day for the occasion. The whole family was over at our grandparents' house to celebrate Grandma's birthday, and the weather was perfect. Light clouds in the sky gave the occasional reprieve from the sun, and a slight breeze kept it cool. Spring was coming out of its winter hibernation as scents of growing grass filled the air. Most of the family was here, even though we would all see each other again in a couple of weeks when Easter rolled around, but that was life with the Zelenskys. If you haven't seen each other in a few weeks, it's been too long, Granddad always said. It was nice to be a part of a big family that took the time to actually get together, but sometimes it could be a little much. Part of me wished to be like my mother right now and be at home having a quiet weekend before Monday came. But alas, my immune system betrayed me and kept me from catching whatever she had, unlike my brother. No free weekend for me, but I made up for it by piling my plate high and settled in for a nice meal. I was just about to dig in when a tiny elbow pierced my side, drawing my attention away from my fork of food. Turning to look at the culprit, I saw my 8-year-old niece trying to sit like a grown-up and be all proper. It was completely undermined by her blonde hair going wild in every which way from our roughhousing. But she was trying to look prim. She even had a napkin in her lap trying to copy me. Mom says we have to say grace before you can eat. She nodded her little head while looking at my fork that was making its way to my mouth. Oh yes, how could I forget? I thought that I could at least get a few bites in before everyone was ready, but I guess not with my little watcher next to me. Not wanting to argue with a child over something that wasn't worth it, I waited for the rest of the chairs to fill up. When everyone was ready, Granddad did his usual spiel about thanking the Lord for the meal and whatnot while I used this time to be way more productive. I sat and looked around at all the little kids to see if I could catch any of them trying to start eating early. And I took that job very seriously because if I didn't get to eat early, then neither did they. It might be petty for a 24-year-old man to police little kids like this, but hey, you have to get your joy from somewhere. Plus, seeing how fast they shut their eyes and bow their heads when they notice me staring at them always put a smile on my face. The meal went by smoothly. We sang happy birthday and had some cake doing the whole shebang. It happened often enough in the family we were all used to it by now. After the meal was over, and we were cleaning up the table, the little rascal's mother made her way over to me. Thanks for playing with them, Chris. They really like you. Abigail said while giving me a pat on the shoulder. I looked up from wiping the table and saw her pushing her hair out of her face before she let out an exasperated sigh. She looked exhausted, most likely from all the planning and cooking that this whole day took. Her brown hair was tied up into a bun, but some stragglers had escaped confinement and were hanging down in her face. "You know this amount of stress will lead to gray hairs," I said back with a smirk about the jab. Seeing her kind smile about giving me a compliment scrunch-up would always be fun. I had been trying to get her to delegate these tasks to the rest of the family for years, but apparently, they just don't do it right. Maybe with a few more gray hair comments would finally get her to delegate. "Oh, thank you for that. Just what I wanted to hear from my sweet and loving little brother after the day I've had," she retorted, turning her calm pat into an aggressive shaking. "Someday you'll learn that you can't do it all," I said back while looking up at her. "Or die of a heart attack." By that point, my father had walked up to us and heard the tail end of what I had said. "Chris, be nice to your sister. She put in a lot of work for today." The way he said it reminded me of back when we were kids. My younger brother and I would gang up on her when we played, causing him to step in and mediate. Funnily enough, the usual reason was because she was too controlling. Gabriel and I didn't really want to play by her rules, even if she was the oldest and claimed to know better. This would devolve into a screaming match in which our dad would say, "Boys, be nice to your sister." Quite similar to how he said it now, believe it or not. "Yes, Dad," I said back in a monotone voice, just like I would have 15 years ago when we were kids. That earned me an eye roll from Abigail and a chuckle from Dad. "Oh, don't be like that, Christopher," he said, ignoring our flashback moment. "Anyways, I came to make sure you were coming to Easter in 2 weeks. It'll be at our house this year, so it's a bit closer to you." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said back cheerfully and not at all sarcastic, which caused him to give me a withering glare in return. Now that he couldn't look down on me with that face, it had lost some of its effect. But the meaning was clear. Being the same height had its advantages now that I was older. "Son, these things won't last forever, and you might come to miss the family get-togethers when they don't happen anymore. By then you should have a family of your own to bring along. Speaking of, I noticed that Megan couldn't make it. Is she all right?" He slipped that last part in like it wasn't his main reason for coming over here. I groaned. "Dad, don't even start with that. Just because Mom isn't here to butt into my love life doesn't mean that you have to fill that spot." "Oh, I noticed that too. Everything okay there?" Abigail not so helpfully joined in, adding to my troubles. "Not you too," I said, pointing at her while sneakily starting to back away. My attempt to get out of the question was painfully obvious, but I continued with my performance anyway. "Oh, would you look at the time? I think I hear Anna calling for her favorite uncle." I turned and started to briskly walk away while ignoring the peanut gallery behind me. Usually, it was my mother that always brought up my love life, but with her home sick, it looked like my dad would be taking up the mantle. A quite well-executed exit stage left, if I do say so myself. Avoiding the questions before they even started. There were only so many questions about my missing girlfriend that I could take, and that quota had been met within minutes of arriving without her. While there were perks of having a large family, everyone wanting to know your business wasn't one of them. As I walked away, I wasn't actually going towards Anna, but I ended up finding her anyway with another girl her age. She was with one of my cousin's kid, and they were trying to steal more cookies from the dessert table while the grown-ups were all talking. Embracing my inner child, I snuck up behind them and employed my deepest and authoritative voice. "What do you think you're doing?" They nearly jumped out of their shoes from the unexpected deep voice behind them, causing me to laugh so hard I had tears coming out of my eyes. They whipped around and found that it was not one of their parents or grandparents catching them red-handed, but me laughing my ass off. Finding out it was their uncle instead of their parents made them start berating me while pushing me away with aggrieved expressions. "That's not funny, Uncle Topher," they both whined. While I was wrapping up my laughter, they quickly adjusted their strategy. "I think that you owe us a cookie for scaring us. You think you're slick? I see what you did there, and I'm not falling for it." I liked their quick thinking of trying to get me to give them a cookie, but I wasn't going to give in that easily. They would have to try harder than that. Before they could go into detail about why they did indeed deserve a cookie, a low rumbling cut them off. The ground started to shake and I could hear the wind chimes in the yard start to get louder and louder. Both Anna and Lily, my cousin's daughter, started looking around frantically wondering what was going on. The whole time, the shaking and rumbling was increasing in intensity. The only thing I could think of was an earthquake, but we didn't get earthquakes in Ohio. Tornadoes occasionally, but not earthquakes. While the ground felt like it was tearing open, a bright flash lit up the sky. The flash was so bright I had to shield my eyes, and a few people let out shouts of exclamation at the unexpected second sun. Words could be seen, but I wasn't sure what they could mean, and before I got a better look, they were gone. Initialization complete. Welcome to the multiverse. Prepare to be relocated into a designated tutorial zone. A robotic voice rattled in my head and saw the matching words floating in the air in front of me come into focus. At first, I thought I had hit my head during the earthquake or something, but I could see other people swiping in front of them right where I saw the words appear. On a whim, I asked the two girls if they saw it too. Anna, did you hear a voice in your head and see words floating in front of you? I asked. Yeah, it's so cool. My hand goes right through them like they're not even there. And they move with my head, she said enthusiastically while shaking her head back and forth and swiping her hands in front of her face. Lily started doing the same thing as Anna, and soon both girls looked like they were trying to find their way down a hallway in the dark. I had no idea what to do. I didn't think that I hit my head, and it didn't seem like a hallucination if the girls could see it too. At least someone is having fun with it, I thought to myself while looking at the girls look like fools as they vigorously shook their heads to make the words dance. That was my last thought before everything went black. Chapter 2 Classes. When the light finally returned, I could clearly see that I was not in my grandparents' backyard anymore. Everything I could see was white. White walls, white tile on the floor, and a white ceiling to top it off. The grout for the tiles was white even. It looked like an extremely sterile futuristic medical room, and the only thing it was missing was the medical beds. Before I could question why there was nothing in the room, I noticed that there was a humanoid creature standing in the center of the room. That's odd. I definitely would have noticed it standing there earlier. It's the only damn thing in the room, I thought to myself. Welcome to the multiverse human. I am HG 60743. My task is to introduce the status screen and help you select your starting class and skill before the tutorial starts. The thing stated in an unervingly accurate human voice and looked strikingly like a human. The only thing that gave it away as non-human was the way it talked and the lack of facial expressions. It just had a blank expression on its face and soulless eyes that stared ahead. It had short brown hair in a common haircut for men and had regular brown eyes to match. Where am I? What are you? Where is my family? The questions flowed out of my mouth almost faster than I could think of them. You are in a system-protected space to process incoming integrating populations before your designated tutorial starts. As I said before, I am HG 60743, or Human Guide 60743, if you wish to be specific. I cannot disclose the location of any other system-protected being to you, it said. I guess this was what the words meant when they said, prepare to be relocated. My mind finally caught up to what the thing said before I bombarded it with questions. Classes, skills, status screen, system. Did I get transported into a video game or something? I had read books about something like this, but they were fiction. Keyword there being fiction. As in make-believe, in the same realm as fantasy and or imaginary. Better yet, not real. I started to freak out a little bit. This couldn't be happening. None of this was real. I had to be dead lying in a ditch somewhere, and the universe was playing a trick on me. Before I could get too worked up and go down that rabbit hole of dark thoughts, a calming presence washed over me, lowered my heart rate, and made my breathing even out. What did you just do? I demanded of the thing. Heart rate and stress level exceeded natural resting values by a significant margin. Countermeasure calming spell activated. The thing said like it was explaining why water was wet or grass was green. Not like it was explaining how it forcefully altered multiple natural processes of my body and stopped a near-panic attack cold. I wanted to start yelling at the thing for the blatant invasion of my body and mind, but I just couldn't get angry. Before the boat could get moving, the spell pulled the wind from the sails and made me calm down. It was freaky. Before I could ask any more questions, the thing continued. Now that you are level-headed, let's begin. Could you say or think, status screen, or status? Playing along with the creepy robot that I was pretty sure could mind control me to do what it said anyway, I thought status. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, H-human. Class, none. Profession, none. Faction, none. Strength 8. Agility 7. Perception 10. Fortitude 7. Endurance 5. Vitality 8. Intelligence 8. Wisdom 5. Acumen 6. Free points 0. Laws none. Skills none. Coins 0. What? The fuck? I don't know if I thought it or said it out loud. My mind felt like a broken record. The only thing that I could keep thinking was what the fuck on repeat. The thing was speaking again, but I wasn't paying attention. I was surprised that there wasn't a section on the page that had a portrait of me depicting my non-existent gear like in a video game. I thought of what I would look like with fantasy armor and a sword on my back. It would probably replace my short sandy blonde hair with something more fantasy, like purple or something. Eventually, the robot's insistent voice brought me out of my musings. If you have familiarized yourself with your status sheet, we can move on to class selection. This process is relatively simple as there are only 5 options. Please think about your missing class slot or class selection. I followed along with the voice, bringing up a new screen and leaving my status sheet in the background. Classes available. Warrior. Warriors rely on strength of arms and various melee and weapon skills. They make for formidable frontline fighters, capable of mitigating significant damage. Ideal for those who enjoy fighting up close and personal with a certain approach to combat. Common evolutions. Knight, Berserker, Barbarian, Pugilist. +2 strength, +1 fortitude, +1 endurance, +1 vitality, +1 free points. Rogue. Rogues rely on cunning, agility, and stealth using various melee, weapon, and throwing skills. They make for formidable ambush fighters, capable of dealing significant damage before fleeing. Ideal for those who enjoy sneaking around and exploiting opponents' weaknesses. Common evolutions. Thief, Assassin, Infiltrator, Poisoner. +2 agility, +1 strength, +1 endurance, +1 perception, +1 free points. Ranger. Rangers are experts in survival, tracking, and ranged combat utilizing various bow skills. Ideal for those who enjoy a blend of stealth, archery, exploration, and tactical combat. Common evolutions. Beastmaster, Scout, Sharpshooter, Trapper. +2 perception, +1 strength, +1 agility, +1 endurance, +1 free points. Mage. Mages use the arcane of the universe to fuel their spells. They excel in powerful spells and enchantments to deal significant damage from range. Ideal for those who prefer a tactical and versatile approach. Common evolutions. Ice Mage, Fire Mage, Elementalist, Artillery Mage. +2 intelligence, +1 perception, +1 wisdom, +1 acumen, +1 free points. Healer. Healers use spells to channel healing powers, protection, and support. They may also wield magic against foes. Ideal for those who wish primarily to support their allies, serving as healers and buffers. Common evolutions. Battlefield support, medic, doctor, apprentice healer. +2 wisdom, +2 acumen, +1 intelligence, +1 free points. This was exactly like a video game. It even had the same generic starting classes and everything. Thankfully, the calming spell was still in effect, or I would definitely be freaking out. Whenever I played these kinds of games, I usually played warriors, but that never stopped me from playing others occasionally for variety. This wasn't a video game, though. This was real life, and I needed to start thinking about things more thoroughly. I began by taking stock of all the information available to me. A mysterious and supposedly all-powerful system teleported me from a nice family dinner to wherever this white room was. I now have a status sheet that has my given name sans my middle name, even though my name was never given. And I now had the choice between the 5 different starter classes. Oh, and apparently after my choices were made, I was to join in some kind of tutorial. I tried getting more information out of the thing, but all of the questions I asked of the robot were met with either, "I can't answer that," or "Please choose one of the available classes to proceed." It didn't use those words exactly, but the meaning was clear. I was getting nothing more out of it. The only thing that I could get out of the thing was what each stat meant, and that the average for humans was 10. Strength, agility, and perception were obvious. Fortitude was how tough your body was and let you withstand physical damage and magical damage to a lesser degree. Endurance was basically stamina and how long you could swing a weapon, along with a moderate boost to magical defense. Vitality helped with longevity and how fast you could heal from wounds. It also helped with fighting poisons. Intelligence, wisdom, and acumen were the magical stats. Intelligence governed your mana concentration, resulting in more powerful spells. Wisdom dealt with the size of your mana pool. Acumen determined how fast your mana would regenerate. Looking over my status sheet with the knowledge that 10 was average was kind of depressing. An 8 in strength wasn't bad, but could have been better if I had gone to the gym more. Agility wasn't the best. I wasn't fat or anything, but I definitely wouldn't call myself skinny. I'd never needed glasses and had 20/20 vision since I was a kid, which explained the average perception. I wouldn't say I was a stocky guy, just on the bigger side, with wide shoulders and thick thighs, kind of big. I couldn't remember the last time I did cardio, or ran for that matter, so that explained the lackluster endurance. I was still a young guy, so an average vitality made sense. I was most of the way through a college degree, so the 3 mental stats didn't make sense to me. I attributed it to the fact they dealt with magic and Earth had none, leaving them low, no other reason. Looking at the list of classes over again and comparing it to my status sheet, it looked like the physical classes would suit me better than the magical ones with my low wisdom and acumen. Based purely on my best stat, Ranger would be the best fit. I was never really good with a bow, and being on the taller side at 6 feet 1 inch made sneaking difficult. Warrior was probably the best choice, plus it was the one I wanted the most. The only thing that made me hesitate was that I didn't know if I was going to be put with other people in a party or if I was going to do the tutorial alone. The robot wasn't helpful either, so with the limited information I had, I selected Warrior. Warrior class selected. You have leveled up. Stat points allocated. Skills available. Just like that, I had my first level. I knew it didn't really count as my first real level, but it was still kind of exciting. I could feel foreign energy in my body, slightly strengthening it, moving through all of my muscles and bones. Felt amazing. Opening my status sheet again showed that my stats did go up and that I had a free point available. I put it into endurance to bring it up and felt the energy again working throughout my body. Now that you have selected your class, please equip your starting armor and select your starting weapon. The thing said. A clean set of leather armor materialized on a table next to me, and a variety of weapons were also on the table. Watching a table, weapons, and armor that definitely wasn't there before just materialize out of thin air was freaky, to say the least. There was every weapon imaginable on the table. One-handed swords, two-handed swords, great swords, axes, maces, hammers, spears, halberds, glaives, even tunfas and nunchucks. The nunchucks made me laugh a bit because I read a study once where they proved that a stick of the same length was more effective than nunchucks as a weapon. That didn't even come close to all the weapons available on the table. There were some that I couldn't even name. Be aware that any one-handed weapon can be accompanied by a shield or be turned into a matching set for both hands. The robot added, "Well, that changes things." I was originally leaning toward a two-handed sword or a spear before I knew that shields were even an option. Knowing that I had zero experience with any of these weapons, going without a shield to help block seemed stupid. A spear was still an option to keep things at length, but I felt that a shield would be more helpful to keep me alive. Knowing I was limited to one-handed options narrowed my search by a significant option. Getting rid of all the exotic and complicated ones narrowed it further. I was really only left with a sword, axe, mace, or hammer. Swords took a lot of technical skill to make good use of, and they weren't very useful against anything that wasn't a human. Mace and hammer were worth considering, but I thought something with a blade would help me better than a blunt weapon. Before I confirmed my selection of the axe, I picked up the leather armor that was on the table to get a better look at it. Never seeing leather armor before made it hard to judge the quality, but it looked like a standard set of leather armor to me. It was a tannish brown color with black straps that looked to keep everything snug. Running my hand along the leather resulted in a hardened and smooth feel to it that made me think that it had gone through some kind of processing, but without knowing of what kind. I couldn't be sure. Equipping the armor was straightforward. The chest piece went over the head and got tightened with the shoulder and side straps. The leggings went over the pants I was currently wearing, and the boots fit snugly, but not very comfortable. The greaves strapped in fine around my calves. The bracers were the hardest to put on and tighten down because I could only use the one hand. All that was left was the helmet, and that easily slipped on. The only thing left unarmored were my joints, my arm above the elbow, and my face. After struggling a little, I managed to strap it all down and look over the completed look. Spinning around a bit and giving myself a once-over made me think that I was ready to go to a Renaissance festival or something. Everything fit perfectly without anything catching or hitting when I moved, which was good. Moving in it was still restricting, but that should get better with experience. I probably should have expected that from armor that was materialized on a table specifically for me to wear. After I had the armor equipped, I walked over and selected the one-handed axe off the table. It was unadorned with it only having a wooden handle and metal head. You could easily tell that this wasn't made for chopping down trees by the way the head was shaped. The wood had some kind of stain or sealant on it, but felt sturdy enough. The edge was so sharp that I could probably shave my beard with it. After picking up the axe, all the weapons on the table disappeared off the table, only to be replaced by a generic round shield and an identical copy of the axe I was holding. After picking up the shield off the table with my free left hand, the table and axe disappeared completely. Chapter 3: Skill Selection. Now that you have selected a class and your starting weapon, you may now select your first skill. The robot added. To bring up the list of available skills, think available skills or skill selection. Following what the thing said brought up an outrageously long list of skills. There were all kinds of things available. All different kinds of weapon proficiency skills with the beginner label, and different kinds of armor proficiencies to match as well, like plate armor proficiency, beginner, and light armor proficiency, beginner. A ton of different striking skills too, like power strike, common, and piercing strike, common. There were even generic skills too, like identify and meditation. I brought up the skill for melee weapon proficiency, beginner, to read through. Melee weapon proficiency, beginner. Using basic proficiency with melee weapons adds a minuscule bonus to the effect of agility and strength when using a fitting melee weapon. What does melee weapon proficiency actually mean? Will it inject knowledge on how to use a weapon into my head? I said mostly to myself. You do not gain any knowledge from proficiency skills. The robot stated. What? You answer questions now. What the hell, I thought. Why didn't it answer my questions before when I was making life-altering decisions on basically no information? I am not allowed to influence the choice of starting class and weapon in any way. Starting skills are different as they are not as fundamentally entwined with your path. Stated. Fundamentally entwined. What did that even mean? Shaking my head to clear those thoughts, I queried the robot for more information. What does the skill do if it doesn't teach me how to use weapons? I asked. If a user has melee weapon proficiency, and they fight using a beginner-level proficiency with a fitting weapon, a bonus is added to the strength and speed of swings, it said. So it doesn't give me proficiency. It adds bonuses when using a weapon the right way. I tried to clarify what beginner level meant, but that was apparently too much information and was ignored by the robot. It turned out armor proficiencies worked the same way, but instead of adding a bonus, it reduced the penalties of wearing the armor on agility and endurance. The striking skills were self-explanatory, so I didn't ask about those just in case there was an unknown limit to the number of questions I could ask. Power strike, common. Enhances the next strike with mana for an increase of strength. Piercing strike, common. Enhances the next strike with mana, increasing the ability to pierce hide and armor. What's the difference between melee weapon proficiency and axe proficiency? I asked, trying to find out why there were proficiencies for all kinds of weapons when a skill existed for all melee weapons. There were even groups of weapons like blade proficiency and heavy weapon proficiency. The broader the proficiency skill, the smaller the bonuses applied are. Axe proficiency at the beginner tier will have a greater bonus to strength and agility than melee weapon proficiency while using an axe in both cases. Keep in mind that if the user has both skills, then only the one with the greatest effect will be used. The thing answered, I guess that made sense. The more restrictive the skill was in weapon choice, the bigger the bonus was. The more variety available means a smaller bonus. Them being mutually exclusive was a bummer, but not that big of a deal. The robot said that Identify would help me see the levels of creatures and the names and grades of items at the crude tier and below. I assumed that crude tier was the lowest. Meditation would help in the recovery of mana and heal wounds faster. How important is skill choice for future classes? I asked, wondering how important this choice was going to be for the future. Skills a user has can affect future skills offered and class evolutions. A mage that uses exclusively ice or fire skills will be offered specialized classes with that in mind. Or a sword wielder will be offered more advanced skills if they have the prerequisite skills already, said the guide. That is not to say that skills cannot be obtained by other means. Skill books can be bought from others and acquired in various means, like dungeons and system prizes. The guide added, that makes this choice easier. If I could buy skills, then all of the common and beginner skills that I was being offered now could be gotten later if I needed them. I wonder how many skills I can have. There is no way I can have them all. How many skills can I have? I asked. The spirit can only hold so many skills per tier before it becomes strained, the guide said. Outside of the 6 skills acquired through improving class level, on average only 4 or 5 more can be gained while in the lower tiers. Spirits grow with time and training but can be slow. Advancing in tier can greatly strengthen your spirit, among other things. Oh, that added some juicy bits there. I assumed that there were different tiers given that my race was H-human, but that confirmed it. Also, the knowledge that classes gave 6 skills was new. Adding class skills and the extra skills that could be added gave me 10 or 11 skills per tier. Please note that every person is different, and some being spirits can only handle 1 or 2 skills outside of the ones acquired through their class. Okay, so 4 or 5 is average. I can only hope that my spirit was at least average, so I wouldn't have to worry about the number of skills I had. Knowing that my choice of skill wasn't exactly critical for the future eased my mind. Now that I didn't have to worry about ruining my future, I could pick based on immediate need. I had no proficiency to speak of in armor or axes, so that got rid of them. The general skills like Identify and Meditation were thrown out next. Survival was paramount, and being able to know the name of the creature that was going to eat me was useless if I couldn't kill it. That left all the active skills of numerous types. I focused on the offensive skills because I figured with my choice of a shield, that a defensive skill would be unnecessary and augmenting my attacking power would be more useful. Even narrowed down to the offensive skills that were compatible with what I had available still left a long list. For some reason Mana Bolt was on the list even though I wasn't a mage. I ignored those and focused on those that could be used with my axe. That left all the striking skills and a few that were to be used while throwing the axe. Not wanting to have a skill that effectively disarmed me, I ignored those. Penetrating Strike and Piercing Strike were extremely similar. Looking through the list left me coming back to Power Strike. It was the most basic and could be used in a variety of ways no matter what enemy I faced. Power Strike, common. Enhances the next strike with mana for an increase of strength. With my decision made, I confirmed my choice. Knowledge of how to activate the skill was inserted into my mind, which was unnerving to say the least. If it could force information into my brain, could it take it away? Could it mind control me? Activating the skill came naturally from following the knowledge that was imparted in my mind, and I could feel energy moving through my body and flowing down my arm to the axe. The axe started to glow with a blue hue that got brighter as more mana entered the axe. Not wanting to waste the skill, since I knew it wouldn't last very long, I took a stance and swung the axe like a baseball bat. I could feel the axe swinging faster than what was normal, leaving a blue line in its wake from the mana expelled during the swing. I swung at the air since there was nothing in the room to hit other than the robot, and I didn't feel like hitting it was a good idea. Not having a target made it so the only thing the skill did was glow and swing faster, but I knew that it would hurt to get hit with it. Now that all choices have been made, you will be transferred into your designated tutorial zone. The guide looked directly into my eyes and said, "We wish you the best of luck. May your spirit never be extinguished." Chapter 4 Arrival. Well, that wasn't ominous. May your spirit never be extinguished. What did that even mean? I assume it meant don't die, but the way it phrased it made it sound so much worse. Before I could think further about the warning, I was once again teleported. 1 second in a white room, the next standing in a forest clearing in the middle of the woods. The first thing that caught my attention was that there were other people. So I won't be alone. That's good, I thought. Usually parties were the most effective in RPG games. Everyone was just lingering around in groups of various sizes, with some of the larger ones pushing 30 or 40 people. The smallest being around 10 or so. I started to look around to see if my family was here when, "Christopher!" Someone shouted my name from behind me. I turned around to find Abigail waving at me with some of the rest of my family around her. Anna and Josh were standing behind her looking around at the forest they suddenly found themselves in. Some of my cousins and their significant others were standing around them as well. Walking over gave me enough time to notice that everyone else was decked out in the same kind of gear that I had. Some were wearing robes of mostly cloth while others matched what I had with full leather. Some had a mix of both where just the chest and head were protected by leather and the rest was cloth. I figured those were the rogues and rangers while the mages and healers were in cloth. There was an assortment of weapons to be seen strapped to everyone's side or on their back. It looked like swords were the most common, with spears coming in a close second, but there was the occasional oddity. Like when a young man with short dark brown hair had a pair of tunfas in his hands. When I reached my sister, she looked me up and down, taking in the change in appearance of my new gear while I did the same to her. She was wearing an off-white cloth robe over the clothes she was wearing before. She must have picked either mage or healer by what seemed to be a wand looped in her belt. She was a nurse, so I bet she must have picked healer. "You look like you're about to go raid the English coast," she said. Humph. Seeing that she had skipped over worried, angry, and frantic, to go straight to comedic relief did not bode well. Abigail has always been a classic control freak and loathes when things are outside of her control. Nothing about this situation was inside her control. Now that she said it, I saw that I did look similar to what you would see depicting Vikings in shows and movies. I was covered in leather armor and wielded a shield in one hand and an axe in the other. Some of my blonde hair was sticking out of the helmet, and my beard was on full display with the open-faced helmet. The only difference was my height being about 5 inches taller than the average Viking. "You can put those away, nothing is going to attack you," she said, pointing at the readied axe in my hand. I didn't know where she had gotten this information, but I trusted her enough to listen. Looking down to my leather belt, I saw that there was a loop to house my axe that I hadn't seen before. I sheathed my axe in the belt loop but didn't know what to do with my shield. Looking around, I saw that anyone else that had a shield was either holding them like I was or had them attached to their back. Not wanting to look like an idiot in front of so many people, I refrained from trying to turn my head to see if there was something on my back to hold the shield, which would most likely result in me spinning around like a dog chasing its tail. "Here, let me help." Abigail must have seen my dilemma and helped me out. "Turn around." Doing what I was told, I felt her guiding my shield into what felt like a magnetic connection on my upper back. That didn't make any sense. The shield was mostly wooden with only a few metal additions like the center embossment and a strip along the edge. There wasn't anything that it should have been able to connect to, especially on the inside of the shield, as that was the side touching the armor. "It's some kind of magic, I think." Jonathan, my sister's husband, set off to the side. He must have seen my puzzled look after the shield snapped into place. I looked over to see him in similar gear as me. He had a full set of leather armor signifying a warrior class with an identical shield on his back, probably how Abigail knew how to holster it. The only difference being the sword that hung from his hip instead of an axe. "What's going on? How do you know we won't be attacked? Where is Dad and the rest of the family?" I blurted out. There was no way that I could hold it in anymore. There were just so many questions that I wanted to know the answer to. Everything that I had once known had changed so abruptly in the past 30 minutes, and she was acting like everything was normal. What I didn't know was that she had spent the last 30 minutes frantically running around trying to find Josh and Anna, trying to explain what was going on to two young children and the rest of our family that showed up after her, and frantically worrying about what the fuck was going on. She had gone completely beyond worried and straight to an unnatural calm. "I don't know what's going on." A voice said that the tutorial hasn't started yet. "I don't know where Dad and the others are, but they might show up soon." She said it with a monotone like she had repeated it countless times. Looking around at the 20 or so family members already here showed that this probably wasn't the first time she had answered these questions. Before I could demand more answers out of her, she held up her hand. "Let me explain what I know and you can ask questions after." Closing my mouth and nodding for her to go ahead, she continued, "Everyone that I have spoken to was sent into a white room with the only thing in it being a creepy robot thing that called itself a guide. It had them pick a starting class, choose a weapon from a table, and select a starting skill." Okay, that made sense. It was exactly what had happened to me. After calming me down, the robot said that the only way for me to leave the room was to make my selections. Not knowing where Anna and Josh were, I went through the choices as quickly as possible. After the choices were made, I was sent here. She continued, "That made sense. I couldn't imagine being suddenly separated from your kids and not knowing where they were. Having gone through the options so fast, I was one of the first ones here. I found Anna and Josh standing around with a bunch of other children their age in this forest clearing," she said, waving a hand at both of the aforementioned children behind her. As more and more people showed up, a voice from the sky said that the tutorial would start when all of the participants had arrived. A voice from the sky. Is the system waiting for everyone to arrive? Is there someone else that is running this thing? After some more back and forth between us, I learned that children below the age of 14 got sent directly into the forest clearing and were not given the option of selecting a class. They weren't even able to get a status screen. Other than that, she didn't have any other information. She didn't know when, or if, our father would show up or anything else about this tutorial. After it was clear that she didn't know anything more, I looked at the rest of my family that had arrived. More than half of the ones that were at my grandparents' house were already there with me. Two of my father's brothers were standing with their respective families, and my aunt's husband was here standing next to their children. Lily was over by her parents, who were holding her younger brother. The variety of different class choices was nice to see. I didn't think that a group of solely warriors would do very well. Most of the older men in the family picked the warrior class and had full leather on. There were a few rangers that were demarked by the bow and arrows. It was hard to tell the mages and healers apart as they were both in cloth and had wands or staves. Rogues and rangers were by far the least numerous, with only a couple of my teenage cousins choosing rogue. They probably thought that it would be cool to sneak around and stab things in the back, not thinking of the vulnerability of lighter armor and weapons that required near physical contact. Waiting for the rest of my family to arrive gave me time to survey the other groups around us. I found that everyone knew each other in some way but didn't know anyone else outside of their group. I could tell by the way that there was clear demarcation where one group ended and another began, and the lack of anyone talking outside of their circle. There would be a group of 15 people all talking to each other quietly in a circle, while a few yards away there would be a similar group doing the same thing. Some of the groups had similar facial features and hair color, and I assumed that they were all the same family, like my family, that had all been brought along together. Taking the time to count all the different mingling groups resulted in exactly 50 different groups. There would be the occasional arrival in the middle of the clearing before someone who knew them would wave them over to wherever their group was standing. Watching people suddenly appear was a new experience for me. Never would I have thought that I would watch people beam in like on Star Trek. While waiting, I asked Abigail what she picked in the white room, and she confirmed that she chose healer. She also said that she chose a wand and the skill, healer's hands. The skill required physical contact and converts mana into healing energies applied through the hands used to heal wounds. After telling them the choices that I had made, Jonathan and I laughed at how similar we were. The only difference being weapon choice. He even took Power Strike for his first skill as well. Eventually, my dad arrived in the middle of the clearing, and he just stood there and looked around with a bewildered look on his face. He looked like a fish out of water. He was never much into video games, so the system and classes were probably completely new to him, and he had no idea what was going on. Abigail called out to him, and he started walking over to us while I gave him a once-over. He and I must have had the same idea based on the amount of leather armor on his body and the shield and axe in his hands. He looked like a version of me, only 30 years older and with black hair that was fighting back the gray instead of the sandy blonde that I had. He also didn't have the magnificent beard that I always kept. I got him to grow it out one time, and it was this dark black mane that a lion would be proud of. It was thicker than mine. Suffice it to say, I was a little jealous. My mother hated it and constantly asked him to shave it. It didn't last very long. It seemed he didn't know what to do with the axe and shield that he was given either and looked ready for a monster to jump out at him. When he reached us, he asked much of the same questions that I had. Filling him in on what little information we knew didn't seem to help things. After holstering the weapon, he went off to talk with his siblings to see if they knew something we didn't. Soon, the new arrivals began to wind down with new people arriving slower and slower, and the clearing began to feel crowded. There were about 1,000 people standing around by this point. The only person that was still missing from our family was my grandfather. He soon showed up in the clearing with an oddly determined look in his eye. Spotting us, he made his way over. Watching him walk made me notice something odd. He had a certain gait he walked with that showed a confidence I had never seen in him before. He gripped his spear like he was familiar with the weapon. It was odd. Before he could say anything after he got to us, a voice in the sky sounded out over the whole clearing. "Welcome. Now that all participants have arrived, we may begin, so I only have to do this once." After the voice spoke, everyone quieted down to find out what all of this was about. No doubt all of you are curious about what is in store for you, so let's get started. While your planet is getting terraformed after the introduction of mana, all previous inhabitants were relocated into various different tutorials to introduce to them the ways of the multiverse. After the planet stabilizes, in 3 months' time, the tutorial will end and all surviving participants will be returned. As he said that, a timer counting down from 3 months started on everyone's status screens with the amount of days/hours/minutes/seconds left until the tutorial ended. Tutorial end. 89:23:12:30. After the timer popped up, another screen came into existence. Tutorial description. Category: Area Defense. Modified. Objectives: stake your claim and make your stand. After solidifying faction affiliation, go forth and claim a fortress pylon and defend it for the duration of the tutorial. Waves of enemies will assault your encampment seeking to destroy the pylon with increasing ferocity for the duration of the tutorial. Earn points by killing monsters roaming the area and on the successful defense of the pylon. Additional points may be earned by conquering additional pylons. Participants will reward a portion of their total points upon death. Rewards are distributed at the completion of the tutorial and are dependent on performance, points earned, fortress level, number of faction survivors, and any additional feats accomplished. Beware, for monsters are not the only enemy lurking in this forest. Before I could finish reading the new screen that appeared, the voice began speaking. Due to modification of the original tutorial, I am required to give you time before the tutorial starts to prepare. So listen up, for I will not repeat myself. The first thing to do is to form the factions that you will be a part of. There can be as few as 1 and as many as 50. After factions are created, pylon locations will be chosen by the faction heads. You have 30 minutes to form factions. To say that after the message ended there was pandemonium would be an understatement. Around 1,000 voices began discussing what to do with the information we were given. I heard a few of the louder ones trying to speak loud enough to get everyone's attention, but they quickly got drowned out by all of the different conversations. Some even shouted at the voice to explain more but fell on deaf ears. My grandfather took everything in stride and quickly gathered all of our family together and had us move to the edge of the clearing closest to the forest. I don't know what's going on, but being in the center of that mess is a bad idea, Granddad said while ushering us further away. It surprised me how fast that Granddad took charge of the situation and got the whole family huddled together. Usually, it was my grandmother or sister who were the organizers of family events. Now that we were sufficiently distanced from the crowd, Granddad turned to discuss his plan. It's clear that this game is going to pit us against all the other groups, so creating distance is best. With that said, I think that we should stick to ourselves and form this so-called faction of just the family. I do not trust anyone else, and when the infighting begins, that could be deadly. He looked around at everyone individually before adding in a serious tone. And mark my words, there will be infighting. It was mind-boggling how fast he adapted to the situation. I still hadn't gotten over the fact that my world was now a video game, while he not only discerned the potential for bloodshed but acted to give his family the best shot at survival. Looking back now, I saw what he was talking about. The objective looked innocuous, saying points were earned through killing monsters and defending your pylon, but you were also rewarded for killing others and conquering other pylons. I wouldn't say that I didn't have faith in humanity, but the reward for murder wouldn't go unclaimed. I wasn't saying that this clearing was going to devolve into a bloodbath as soon as the tutorial started, but a couple of months of fighting to survive would change that. My thoughts about it kept coming back to the last sentence of the description. Beware, for monsters are not the only enemy lurking in this forest. Did it mean to be wary of other people? A few people in the family voiced disagreement, but they were quickly outvoted when most agreed that keeping the faction in the family was best. There were only a few holdouts that required convincing, but I tuned that out to watch what everyone else was doing. Most stayed in the groups they came with and looked to be content with that being their faction. Some of the smaller groups looked around at the larger groups with pensive expressions and migrated toward other small factions as if to merge. There were a handful of people that were going from group to group, trying to get everyone to band together into one huge faction. Judging by the reception they were getting, public opinion was similar to ours. Okay, so we are all in agreement. Just our family in the faction. My grandfather said to a chorus of nods from us. I guess from our agreed consent, the system sent a notification to confirm the creation of the faction. After the faction was formed, we had to dictate a faction leader and decide on a name. Everyone agreed that the leader should be Granddad. After becoming the leader, he went with the completely original name of the Zelensky family. With our faction confirmed, we waited for the rest of the 30 minutes to elapse. People were still scrambling around trying to finalize factions. Everyone must have been scared of the voice because with over a minute before the timer ended, everyone was in a faction and ready to go, not wanting to find out what would happen otherwise. I spotted a few changes in the group structure, with some of them merging together, but most stayed the same. Our faction looked to be on the higher end in terms of number of members with 30, but we were by no means the largest. 5 or 6 of the smallest groups banded together to become the largest faction with over 50 people, it looked like. Now that factions have been formed, the only thing left to do is to claim your pylon. After the voice said that, everyone was notified with a screen that appeared before them that had a map on it. There appeared to be around 50 different markers distributed throughout the map. In the northern section there looked to be mountains and snow, while the south looked to be a desert with sand covering a majority of it. Looking the map over, I assumed that it represented the area we were in, but that didn't make any sense. The biomes were too close together to be natural, and forests and mountains were abruptly cut off and not naturally ending. I figured that there was some magic fuckery about. Just as I finished looking over the map, one of the markers on it disappeared, with an average-size group disappearing along with it from the clearing. That sparked a fury of activity in the groups, where shouting started between different members about which spot looked the best. One of the markers in the middle of the map, in what looked like a lush forest, disappeared next. Markers quickly started leaving the map after that. Granddad took his time to look over the map as we were getting more and more nervous watching the markers in the middle of the map leave. Finally, he selected a marker that was mostly in a mountainous region with some green forest to the south and a river to the east. Everything went black for the 3rd time today, and I was hoping this wouldn't be a reoccurring trend. Chapter 5: Getting Started. The first thing that I noticed was the change in temperature. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt at my grandparents' house since it was mid-March and Ohio was going through the false spring period with temperatures in the high 60s or low 70s. After putting on an extra layer of leather, the clearing we came from was starting to make me sweat, even though it was roughly the same temperature. Standing on top of the hill we were on, I could feel the cool breeze cutting through my gear and was not looking forward to the temperature drop at night. Being cold was better than being hot, but sleeping in frigid temperatures didn't sound appealing. I took a moment to take in my surroundings and was blown away by the view. It was breathtaking. To the north were the tallest mountains I had ever seen, with snow-capped tips jutting into the clouds. Being from Ohio and never having been to a mountain, that statement didn't mean much, but I had no words to describe it. To the west and east were rolling hills for miles before ending and turning into a flat plain with a river running through it to the east. The west ended in a forest a bit further out than where the hills stopped in the east. To the south, there was a much closer forest that was only a couple miles away compared to the dozen or so miles to the west. I didn't know which direction was the most beautiful, as they all had a picturesque look to them. Why didn't you pick one of the middle markers that were closer to the forest? It's freezing here. One of my uncles broke the silence with his question. Having an easily defensible position is more important than being comfortable with the temperature. Plus, those markers were surrounded on all sides by other markers. Having to defend from every direction is impossible with the amount of people we have. This far north has hills that are defensible, a close forest for lumber and food, a river to the east for water, and no markers further north, so we can't be surrounded. Granddad's answer gave me something to think about. He was already thinking ahead to which areas would be defensible and which could be surrounded by other factions, even taking food and water into account. It gave me comfort to know that he was taking this seriously and thinking of the future, because if it was up to me, I would have picked one of the middle ones. There was a blinking obelisk at the top of the hill we were standing on that took our attention away from the discussion, and all of us walked towards it. The obelisk itself wasn't that large, being only about 4.5 feet tall and only a foot wide on both sides. After some trial and error, we discovered that touching the obelisk brought up a new screen where you could buy things from a store using points. As none of us had any points yet, we couldn't buy anything, but we could still look and see what was available for purchase. Skills were available alongside gear and weapons. There were even defenses available to turn the area around the pylon into a fortress, like wooden walls and guard towers, but they were grayed out like it was unavailable. The most exciting thing was at the bottom of the list. It said, "Upgrade to Outpost to unlock more options." There was no telling what we would eventually be able to purchase, and I was starting to get a little excited. What if it can give me a skill to throw fireballs or something? At the top of the list, there was a button that said, "Claim ownership of pylon." Not knowing what else we were supposed to do, Granddad selected it and confirmed that he wanted to claim ownership. As soon as that happened, a timer started counting down from a minute with big bold letters that said, "Defend your claim." Not knowing what to do, and with a timer counting down for mysterious reasons, we all began to panic. "Calm down," a loud, authoritative voice said that cut through the growing panic. "Everyone make a circle around the obelisk. Anyone with a shield or melee weapon stand in the front. Healers stand in the center. Anyone with a ranged attack stand behind the shields." My grandfather barked out. Jonathan, my father, and I all looked at each other and the shields on our backs and shrugged. It made the most sense logically, but actually standing in the front for the unknown that was to happen didn't bring warm and fuzzy feelings. There were 30 fighting members in our faction, and only around half had melee weapons of some sort. The rest either had bows or wands. After separating into our assigned layers, it showed there were a dozen warrior classes and half of them had shields. The rest either had spears or two-handed swords. One uncle had a huge two-handed battle axe. The rogues were more uniform, with all 4 of them having either 2 daggers or 2 short swords. I must have mistook some of the rogues as warriors. There's more than I thought. Looking back at the center of the circle showed there were 4 healers with 10 people surrounding them that had ranged attacks. Only 3 of them had bows, so I hope the rest had some kind of ranged magic attack. All in all, if looked at from above, it probably looked like a hodgepodge of 2 vague circles surrounding the pylon with a cluster in the middle. There were still 30 seconds on the timer, so I looked over at my dad, who was off to my right. "What's gotten into Grandpa? He seems like a completely different person," I asked. "I've never seen him like this either. I know he fought in Vietnam before the war ended. Maybe he's using what he knows from then." Dad said back, "I had forgotten that he fought in the war. He didn't like talking about it, so it was easy to forget that he did it. Now that my father mentioned it, I could see where the confidence and drill instructor voice came from. The timer ended before I could mull on that thought further, and movement drew my attention over to the hills I was facing towards. It looked like moving dots with how far away they were. "I think I see something," I shouted out and pointed. Everyone turned to look at what I was pointing at when my cousin, who had a bow in his hand, said, "It says they're level 1 and 2 horned rabbits." He got curious looks that wondered about how he knew that and how he could see that far, so he added, "The skill I picked is called Ranger's Eye. It's like identify, but better, and lets me see further." Now that the threat had been identified, my grandfather repositioned all of us so everyone with a shield was in front facing the east. The other melee users split to either side to guard the flanks. A few yards back behind the shields, the healers were spread out with the ranged users behind them in the rear. I didn't know if Granddad was knowledgeable about gaming formations where the healer was always in the middle, or if it was just a coincidence that he set it up like a video game. Protecting the healers was common knowledge everywhere, I guess. Watching the rabbits get closer and closer was a nerve-wracking experience that had me adjusting my grip on my shield and changing my grip on my axe. When they crested the last hill that separated them from us, I finally got a decent count on their number. There looked to be around 50 of them hopping towards us. There was one that lagged behind the others and looked larger than the rest of them. "Kyle, what's that one in the back?" Grandfather asked my cousin with the Ranger's Eye skill. "It says it's a level 4 horned rabbit matriarch." Thankfully, the matriarch wasn't coming in my direction and was targeting the right side of the formation. Not knowing how far the rangers and mages could shoot, Grandfather told them to fire when they could. When they reached the bottom of the hill we were on, which was around 60 yards away, the 3 rangers fired. They must have severely underestimated how far they could shoot because they missed by over 15 yards long. It only took a couple of seconds for me to see 3 more arrows fly over my head, which landed at the right distance but missed any of the rabbits. However, the third time was the charm because one of the arrows hit a rabbit but the other 2 missed. The rabbit was on the ground twitching with an arrow sticking out of it, which meant the arrow wasn't instantly fatal, but the rabbit was down for the count. The rangers got a few more volleys in with limited success before the mages got their turn. I got to watch as all kinds of magic attacks got launched from the 7 mages behind me. 2 looked like fire bolts, there was an ice bolt, a water blob, and 3 looked like generic mana bolts due to the lack of identifiable element. I don't know if it was the fact that the rabbits were closer, magic was easier to aim, or the fact there were 7 instead of 3, but the magic attacks had more success with 2 hitting on the first volley. One rabbit was lit on fire by a fire bolt and died, while another exploded from a mana bolt. The mages kept firing alongside the rangers, but after the 5th volley, the mages started slowing down, only firing every once in a while. I didn't have any time to wonder about why before the rabbits were on us. There were about half the rabbits left and only 6 shields to block them. Being in the left middle of the line where they were most concentrated was not the ideal position to be in, so I braced my shield in front of me, trying to cover as much as possible, and lowered my center of gravity like a person was about to ram into me. Watching as they prepared to launch themselves at me was when my nerves reached their peak. Wearing armor and having a shield in front of me was all well and good, but that didn't help my mind from freaking out at the sheer craziness that my day had turned into. There were 5 rabbits that launched themselves at me. Thud, thud, thump. 2 thudded off my shield, and 2 rammed into either leg, and the last one missed and passed by me. The rabbits didn't have a lot of mass behind them, but it was all concentrated into one point by the horn, which made it feel like getting hit by a baseball on both legs. The impact to the shield wasn't hard, having braced for the impact, but it was surprisingly strong. I grunted from the impact to my legs, but held steady, catching another rabbit's attack on my shield. It bounced off and landed right in front of me. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, I stepped forward and swung my axe at it like it was a piece of wood that needed splitting. I didn't want to waste time trying to activate my skill since I wasn't familiar with it yet, and I wanted to land my attack before it could jump away. Turned out it was unnecessary. My axe cleaved the rabbit mostly in half before thudding into the ground with blood splattering all over the place. I could feel the warm liquid on my face, and I was pretty sure some of it got into my mouth. The system chimed a notification, but I ignored it to quickly pull my axe back and get my shield back in front of me. I fought the urge to wipe my face and worked to maneuver the unfamiliar slab of wood into place but didn't manage it in time before a rabbit hit me in the arm. The horn pierced my skin easily and went an inch into my arm. Ag! It was half a grunt and half a scream that came out of my mouth from the pain. Blood ran down my arm and dripped to the ground. The wound started throbbing with a stinging pain. It wasn't the worst pain I'd felt, but still wasn't pleasant. Pain shot down my arm when I tried to move it. I won't be swinging my axe. My thoughts felt disconnected, and it wasn't the pain that had me so freaked out. It was the fact I watched a horn pierce into my arm and draw blood. I knew this was real and not a trick of the mind, but getting wounded made it a different kind of real. A kind that, if I was being honest, I didn't really like. I was ashamed to admit it because I didn't want to be called a coward, but this wasn't what I signed up for in life. I was supposed to be finishing college and then get a cushy engineering job somewhere, not playing warrior in a fantasy book. I pulled my shield back in front of me and wished that all of this would be over quickly. I didn't even try to swing my axe again. I did take note for future reference not to leave myself open like that, and with that done, I just stood there waiting for the impacts to stop. The rabbits weren't intelligent, so they kept throwing themselves at our shields without trying to go around. I don't know if they were ordered or if it was their own decision, but the melee users on the flanks rotated around and started attacking from the sides. I just stood there with my shield out, trying not to get hit while the others finished off the rest. After a few minutes, all the rabbits were dead and I didn't have any new wounds. The last rabbit to die was the matriarch, but it couldn't withstand being surrounded and poked to death. And when it died, a chime sounded in everyone's head from a notification. The notifications popped up now that combat was over. You have slain Horned Rabbit, Level 1. 1 point earned. You have contributed in slaying Horned Rabbit, Level 1. 1 point earned. You have contributed in slaying Horned Rabbit, Level 2. 1 point earned. You have successfully defended your claim. Extra experience awarded. 10 points to all who participated. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Skills available. I felt the energy improving my body before I could read the notifications. Looking them over didn't reveal anything new. Getting credit for shielding the rabbits was a nice bonus. I didn't know if I was going to be awarded partial credit or not. My arm was still throbbing in pain and blood was still dripping off my arm, but I wasn't the most injured. The melee users without shields had it the worst. My uncle with the battle axe had a wound to the stomach that was leaking blood and looked quite gruesome. He must have been the one the matriarch targeted, because there was no way the smaller ones would have made that kind of wound. The healers quickly went to the wounded and started using their abilities. Thankfully, no one was too badly injured, with most just having a puncture wound like I did. My sister quickly came over to me and her hands started glowing as she put them onto my bleeding arm. I watched as the wound started closing itself. The bleeding stopped relatively quickly, but Abigail had to use the skill again to get it to heal over completely. It wasn't perfect and still felt tender, but it was good enough for the time being. Satisfied I wasn't going to bleed out, Abigail went to check and see if her husband needed healing. Looking over at him myself, I couldn't see any blood or wounds that were visible, but he was walking with a limp. A rabbit must have caught him on the leg. Now that the wave was over, a light ballooned out from the obelisk and expanded out from it, washing over all of us and extending past us down the hill. It stopped roughly 20 yards away from us and then fizzled out of existence. I assumed that must be the reward for clearing the wave and defending our claim. I brought up my status sheet to see the changes and distract my mind. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, human. Age, class warrior, level 2. Profession, none. Faction, Zelensky family, temporary. Strength 13. Agility 7. Perception 10. Fortitude 9. Endurance 8. Vitality 11. Intelligence 8. Wisdom 5. Acumen 6. Free points 1. Laws none. Skills power strike. Coins 0. Points 15. I put my free point into fortitude so I wouldn't get injured as easily, bringing it up to 10. I brought up the skill list to choose my second skill. The list was the same as before, so I didn't have to look everything over again. Knowing what skill I wanted, I flipped to the defensive section and selected it. Fortified body, common. Uses mana to fortify the body. Bonus to fortitude while active, and the user is harder to knock back while skill is active. Closing my status screen, I saw everyone moving the corpses away from the obelisk and put them at the bottom of the hill, so they were still close enough to skin and eat later, but not leaking blood where we were supposed to be staying. I walked over to help so I wouldn't be watching them work while I did nothing. Some of the rabbits were quite gruesome and wouldn't have anything salvageable from their body, neither meat nor skin being intact. There were a few that were burnt to a crisp from fire bolts that were equally ruined, but the worst were the ones that exploded from mana bolts. Blood and guts were everywhere around the impact site like it was blown up from the inside. One of the healers was walking around to all the blood, and a white glow would flow out of her and the blood would rapidly disappear. It was fascinating to watch and much more interesting than moving dead rabbits around. I wonder what skill that is and if it can get the blood out of my clothes. The cleanup didn't take that long with everyone pitching in to help, and soon all the usable rabbits were piled together, and the unusable ones were thrown into the forest for something to munch on. Most went to interact with the obelisk to see if anything changed, and it now showed that we could build the walls and guard towers. We didn't have the resources or points for it, but they weren't grayed out anymore. It also had the addition that said, "Can only be built on faction-owned land." So that must have been what the light was, visibly showing the land being claimed or something. It stopped about 50 yards from the obelisk, so it claimed a sizable chunk of land, about the size of a football field centered around the pylon. All in all, the first wave wasn't all that bad. Chapter 6: Building Camp. The cleanup didn't take very long, and it gave me some time to work through the events of the day. I had to buck up and get over my fear of getting injured. I knew that didn't sound very rational, and any sane person had the same fear of getting injured, but my family was behind me. If I couldn't step up, one of them would get injured. What if it was Abigail, or little Anna, or Josh? Shaking my head of those thoughts, I looked around at the grassy hill that not that long ago held my first battle. It was a weird thought to have about having a first battle. It made it sound like I was a soldier in the medieval ages or something. That was the truth of things though, even if it was odd to think about. Before I could go too far into my musings, a voice got my attention. "It looks like we need points if we want to get any structures from the pylon thing." My grandfather spoke up from where he had his hand on the obelisk. "How many did everyone get?" Everyone then gave the number of points that they had gotten during the wave, and the average was around 14 points a person, with some having more and some having less. My uncle with the battle axe that finished off the matriarch had the most points with 21. All put together, the whole family had 422 points to our faction name. With it all totaled up, it showed that we didn't have enough for the most basic structure, which was a fancy tent. A tent all the same, but the description said that it had some modifications made to it to increase comfort and durability. That wasn't close to all the fancy fortifications and additions that you could buy from the pylon. We didn't even have enough to get the most basic of skills, and only one person could learn those. Seeing how it was in the afternoon and we had already eaten dinner as a family, we didn't need to worry about cooking something right at this instant. It would be a worry in the morning and for the following days. There was no way those rabbits were going to last very long with how they were stored currently. Now that there wasn't a timer counting down to imminent doom, I could go back to taking in the surroundings. Now that I had been bloodied and there were still signs of the battle, the scenery had a different feel to it. Almost like the touch of death previously brought out the peacefulness that now pervaded the hills we found ourselves on. It made it even better, in my opinion. There was a lot to do and a lot of hands to work. My sister and grandfather got together and split the whole family into groups and gave us tasks to accomplish. The rangers and rogues were given the task of scouting out the surroundings, with an increased focus on the nearest forest to see if there were any threats and/or food for hunting. The rest were split up into groups, with one skinning the rabbits, another chopping down trees, another gathering firewood, and the last was trying to use the wood that was cut down to build a smoker for all the meat. There was some argument over what was going to be built first, with some wanting some kind of shelter, but it was decided that food was more important, and wasting all the meat that was delivered to us was the height of stupidity. Thankfully, there were enough middle-aged dads here that they actually knew what they were doing, enough that it wouldn't end in disaster with the meat catching fire or worse, the structure burning down. I didn't end up part of the smokehouse group, fortunately, and was assigned to chopping down trees. Being a young man and having an axe made that an easy decision for the organizers, and I didn't much blame them. The only thing I was worried about was dulling my axe and it not being effective when I needed it later. Chopping down trees was hard. I had never been a lumberjack and never aspired to be one, but I could appreciate the amount of work it took. I'd cut down a few trees in my time, but it was always with a chainsaw, and cutting one by hand was strenuous to say the least. It took hours, and Jonathan and I took turns, so one of us was chopping while the other rested. But we managed it. Now came the hard part of hauling it back to camp, which was not a two-man operation. Some of the scouts were back by that point, and some took a break from other groups, and all helped in dragging it up the hill. I guess the saying that many hands do light work came from somewhere, because it was easier than I thought it would be. After that, the other tree choppers downed their tree and we repeated the process. By now it was getting dark and exhaustion had set in by the number of yawns I could hear. The little ones looked dead on their feet, half asleep already. There were murmurs and complaints about having to sleep in the open, but there was nothing that we could do about it. The little ones and younger kids got to sleep closest to the fire in the smokehouse with all the adults surrounding them protectively, so if anything attacked, the kids would be safest. There was a watch rotation set up, but thankfully I didn't have to do that until tomorrow night, and I could sleep through the night without worry. My body must have been more exhausted than I thought, because even in the dour sleeping conditions, I fell asleep as soon as I laid down. I wasn't woken up in the middle of the night, so there mustn't have been any trouble. All of the firewood that was gathered and chopped was gone though, and seeing that I sighed. I knew whose job it would be to get more, and it wasn't little Anna's. Getting up and stretching revealed I wasn't as sore as I thought I would be. I wasn't in great shape, and after a day of physical labor I thought it would be damn near debilitating soreness that I would wake up to, especially with the addition of sleeping on the ground. It was still bad, but not as bad as I thought it would be, which was nice. There was another surprise waiting for me when I awoke. I could see the telltale sign of a notification blinking on the side of my vision. Opening it revealed that I had increased my strength and endurance through training. That was good news. I guess you could increase in stats through training. Some of the others were up already, and I could hear them talking about getting an increase themselves. One of the rangers who was practicing his aim after the abysmal accuracy during battle yesterday said that he increased agility. One of the mages said that he increased in wisdom and could now fire more than 5 spells. I guess that was why they slowed down the fire rate the other day. They must have run out of mana. Their conversation continued, and I just listened without saying anything. I was not a morning person and preferred not to speak so early in the morning. Doubly so before having my coffee. That thought made me want to cry. There was no coffee. I couldn't walk into my kitchen and throw some beans in the grinder, put water in the machine, and have a nice steaming cup of coffee ready in a couple of minutes. No, I was in this stupid tutorial in these stupid woods, and we didn't have any coffee. All of this was dumb and pointless and stupid. If I wasn't grumpy before, I was certainly grumpy now. What kind of person could go through the day without their morning coffee? Sociopaths, that's who. And I wasn't a sociopath. At least I didn't think I was. My sister must have sensed my mood and gave me a pitying look. She knew how much I loved my morning coffee, and to do without was sacrilege. The show must go on though, and I couldn't pout about it all day. I'd stop after breakfast, I decided, when we started working again. I didn't think that I could pout through chopping down trees with the physical exertion that was required. Thinking about trying it made me chuckle a little. Someone must have pooled some points for basic necessities, because pots and pans were sitting on the fire above a makeshift stand that looked ready to collapse under the weight. Nodding my head at the new additions, I said, "When did that happen?" "Earlier, when we found out that we had nothing to cook breakfast on. It wasn't that many points and only took a few people to pool together. We also got some cups and a bucket that Uncle Scott took to the river for water. It's already boiled, so you don't have to worry about that." That was great. Not being a morning person always had its perks. Being one of the last ones to wake up meant that breakfast was almost ready and someone already got water. I grabbed myself a cup before shuffling over to the woods for the call of nature. The less said about that experience, the better. I tried to wash my hands in the river, but I didn't know if what I did helped or hurt. I might have just traded one bacteria for another. Hopefully, with stat points and magic powers in the mix, it would help keep me from getting sick. Breakfast was a nice flame-grilled rabbit with a side of rabbit with a complimentary rabbit as well. Not one of the best breakfasts I've ever had, but not the worst. There were a few in my early college days that I still question to this day why I ate what I did. I could hear the kids complaining about the breakfast options and was thankful that I didn't have any. Taking care of a kid throughout this whole process just sounded like cruel and unusual punishment, especially when I was still trying to take care of myself. After breakfast was over and cleaned up, we were split back up into groups to complete the tasks that were given to us. I, unsurprisingly, got the privilege of chopping trees. Go figure. Before Jonathan, who also was on tree duty, and I could start towards the forest, my grandfather walked up to us. Try to stay near the camp and be ready to drop everything and come back. We don't know if what happened yesterday is going to happen again, and if it does happen again, we don't know when. He said. We will. Jonathan and I both said back. I had that chipper thought in my head most of the day, always looking around to make sure nothing was sneaking up on us. The scouts yesterday didn't find anything but the usual forest animals like squirrels, rabbits, and deer. No one knew if there were any predators like wolves and bears in the forest, but being vigilant never hurts. Nothing ended up happening while we were working, except we took a lot more breaks throughout the day and ended up downing a couple more trees. Most of the work was cutting the tree into usable wood after it was cut down, but luckily I didn't have to worry about that, as that was someone else's job. After we downed the second, there was a buildup of trees, so we were told to wait to cut down more until they were needed. One good thing that came out of it was that I never thought that I would be this good at cutting down trees, but after felling 3 of them, I got pretty good at it. I remember seeing a lumberjack competition on TV where they competed in different things, and one of them was how fast they could get through a log with an axe. After incorporating the technique I saw of chopping at different angles to remove the wood, it made it a lot faster. Halfway through the day, after lunch was served, which was, you guessed it, rabbit, but before we could get back to our assigned jobs, Granddad stopped everyone. He had us all grab our weapons and shields. Now I know that everyone is worried and doesn't know what is going to happen, and I don't know anything that any of you don't, but it's always better to be familiar with your weapon than have no idea how to use it. So before another wave comes or something else attacks us, we should practice fighting each other for an hour or 2 each day. Granddad said with his voice loud enough for all of us to hear. It made sense to practice and everything, but the most any of us knew was to stick them with the pointy end. We had no one to guide us on how to fight. Like with my axe, you swing it at things, and that was the extent of my knowledge. Clearing his throat, he added. Also, we should decide what we are going to do with the points that we earn. Should we use half for ourselves and save to buy the skills we want? Should we pool all our points to get structures and roofs over our heads, or something else? We should decide before it becomes an issue. I didn't have a strong opinion on the matter personally. It didn't matter much to me either way it went, but I was leaning towards pooling more than less. History has proven that defensible structures mattered most during a siege, and that was essentially what this was. After walls were built and the other defensive structures were constructed, we could then revisit the points allocation. Opinions were going in every direction this question could go. Some thought that we should keep all our points and only donate whatever the person felt was appropriate. Some thought that we should pool them all and keep none for ourselves and draw for who got to get skills. Then there were the more moderate who thought somewhere in the middle. There was avid discussion about it, but it never devolved into a screaming match, so I guess we had that going for us. After putting it to a vote, it was decided that a 50-50 split would occur until there was any additional information to be had that would change that idea. I felt that it was a good thing that point allocation was dealt with before it became a problem. We went on to decide a few other things as a family, like watch schedules during the night, what would be the first things that we worked on building or gathering, and what would be the order in which we spent the allocation of points. No surprise there, with walls being the first thing that was going to be built. After it was decided, the first thing we had to figure out was how to actually give our points to other people. We found there were a couple of different ways to go about it. Someone figured it out this morning when they had to buy pots and pans. First, we could physically touch the other person and will them an amount of points, and it would transfer them. Second, anyone who was touching the pylon at the same time could use the collective total of all their points to purchase things. And lastly, you could spend your points by allocating them towards something specific, like I could spend my 15 points towards the wall and the total cost would decrease by that amount, or show 15/5 depending on how you wished it to be shown. It didn't really matter which way was used to me, it all worked towards the same goal in the end. But there was a discussion on that as well. I was starting to get sick of these discussions, they were starting to get pointless and reminded me of sitting in meetings at work that could have been an email. Not that it mattered much, but the way that was chosen was the one where we allocated the points toward the item we wished to buy. First on the list being the wall. It was deemed the best for transparency and making sure the points were being spent where we all could see it happen. Once confirmed, the wall sat at a progress of 211 out of the 5,000 needed. That went to show how far away we were from actually getting anything. It felt like the 8 points that I contributed didn't do much. Doing the math showed that we would need 25 more of yesterday's wave to get enough points. There had to be ways of getting points in other ways. There was some thought of building the walls ourselves and using our points for something else, but the description of the walls said, a palisade that has been constructed of high-quality wood and has been enchanted for increased durability. Everyone agreed that what the pylon could provide with its magic would be better than whatever we could throw together. One of my uncles was a contractor who helped build houses, and he downright said that we had nothing to actually build anything with, and the best we could do was shove trees in the ground. We had no concrete to anchor posts into, nor did we have screws or any kind of adhesive to fasten anything together with. We were working with anything that we could make ourselves, and that list was limited, extremely so. After that point was brought up and the lack of any tools or parts was acknowledged, someone did a deep search through the shop and found that we could buy most of everything that was needed. Screws, nuts, bolts, and tools were all available to be purchased along with planks and ingots of metal in different sizes, but the prices were egregious. It was over 100 points for a plank of wood the same size as one we got from a tree we cut down today, and metal was even worse. The odd thing was it was listed under profession resources, so we should be able to get professions somehow, but no one was able to find out where. We assumed we would have to upgrade the pylon to find out. With all of what needed to be sorted out accomplished, we could get back on with the rest of the day and get back to the tasks at hand. I went back to chopping trees for wood, and everyone else went back to what they were doing. My uncles managed to throw together a makeshift smoker yesterday in a rush, but it wasn't very pretty and wouldn't last very long. Their next task was digging out a hole and making a cellar to store the smoked meat in, along with any nuts and berries the scouts managed to forage out in the forest. That's how the rest of the day went, with everyone working on what they were assigned. Taking breaks when they got tired, but pushing through it to get what needed to be done. There wasn't another countdown or another wave of angry rabbits, so that was good. The only thing that gave us a scare was when one of the scouts spotted a bear in the forest, which confirmed that there were predators in the woods. It was assumed there was, but it felt different having confirmation. I ended up getting another increase in endurance from the hard work, bringing it up to double digits. We also continued with an hour or two of training, which was really just mock fighting and getting comfortable with the weapons we were given. I was already getting intimate with the axe by swinging it for hours upon hours every day at trees. Actually fighting with it was different than swinging it at a tree that didn't move and didn't fight back. But I didn't think what we were doing was going to help much when a horde of angry animals tries to maul us. Fighting a human who didn't know what they were doing wouldn't translate to feral wild animals. But at least it wouldn't hurt. By lunch on the third day, I was seriously getting sick of eating rabbit, and so were a few other people. Outside of our normal work time, some of the rangers got together and tried to convince my grandfather that they should put a hunting party together to hunt the bear. My grandfather was reluctant because he didn't want anyone to get injured, and a bear was a big step up from the rabbits that attacked previously. They compromised when one brought up that they could start with a boar that they had found, and Granddad agreed that it was acceptable. Originally, they only planned for the 3 rangers to go together and pelt the boar with arrows from high ground. After it was all planned out and confirmed with all the additions added, I found myself walking with a group of 6 into the woods where the boar was last spotted. The group was composed of a variety of classes, with 2 of the rangers coming. One of them had the skill that could identify levels. We had the ice mage with us, and the last 3 were warriors. 2 with shields and the last one with a spear. It was a standard gaming party setup, which I found funny. 3 backliners who dealt damage from range, 2 frontliners to block and keep the enemy's attention, and the last warrior to protect the backline just in case something got through. It didn't take much time to spot the boar after we started following the trail. One of the rangers that came with us was my cousin Hal, who was an avid hunter, and took a tracking skill as one of his 2 skills. Before we do this, we should probably tell each other what skills we have, so we can plan around it. Alice, the ice mage, said, "That sounds like a good idea. You guys already know that I have a tracking skill, and my other one is precision shot. It makes my arrow fly straighter and less affected by wind." Hal said, "I have Ice Bolt, which I can cast around 5 times before I run out of mana, and the second skill I got was Mana Shield. I haven't used the Mana Shield yet, so I don't know how sturdy it is, or how large of an area it covers, or how long it takes to cast, or how much mana it takes." Alice rambled on, decreasing in volume when she realized that she didn't know much about her skill. By the end, it was just mumbling that I barely caught coming out of her mouth. "Ahem," Austin said, clearing his throat. "I have Piercing Strike, so it's easier for my spear to stab things, and Fortified Body to help with defense and hold the line if something charges me." He got the same skill I did. I did some testing with the skill earlier, and the way it worked was pretty cool. It saturated my muscles and skin with mana so that I was resistant to attacks, and it was harder to damage my skin. It still hurt to get hit, and I could still bleed while it was active, but it was a nice bonus to my defense, which was what I was looking for to begin with. Sensing that it was my turn next, based on the clockwise circle we were going in, I spoke up. "I have Power Strike and Fortified Body." Both my skills were self-explanatory, so I didn't go into much detail. Jack, the other shielded warrior beside me, was next, and he had Sweeping Slash and Extended Blade, which both empowered his sword. Jack even said when he was testing them they could be used together, but the cost was exponentially high. The last to speak was my cousin Kyle, and he said, "You guys already know that I have Ranger's Eye, and my second one is Foraging Sense. I really wanted to get Beast Bond with my second skill, but it wasn't very practical because there was nothing that I could bond with. But if I find like an eagle or falcon or hawk or anything really, I'm definitely going to take it next. You know how cool it would be to have a hawk as a bond that could fly ahead and scout for you. What if you get to see through its eyes like in Assassin's Creed?" "All right, Kyle, we get it. You're excited to get a pet bird." Hal cut him off before Kyle could go any further down the rabbit hole the enthusiastic teen would go. Kyle grumbled a little about how Hal wouldn't get it because all he did was kill things hunting. It still surprised me that the 2 were brothers when they were so strikingly different. Hal was a stocky, muscular, jock-looking guy with the blonde hair that most of my family has, while Kyle was a shorter, scrawny, nerdy kid with dark brown hair that he got from his mother. Hal was the older of the 2, in his late 20s, while Kyle just turned 20 himself not too long ago. Alice had the same blonde hair as most of the family did, and she had it up in a tight ponytail for the occasion and was around the same age as Kyle. Jack was the only one who wasn't part of the Zelensky family. He was actually Alice's boyfriend, who just so happened to be brought to the family dinner before this whole tutorial happened. It wasn't the first time that he was brought to a family event, but they had only been together for a year or 2. Could you imagine if it was your first time meeting your girlfriend's extended family and this shit show happened? I would be freaking out to go through this with what were essentially strangers. Another thing that Jack had that stood out from the rest of us was the ginger hair that stuck out from his helmet. He was the only redhead of the faction unless you counted the strawberry blonde that a few of my family sported. Strangely enough, there was some reddish tint to my beard when in certain lighting, but it would be a stretch to call it red. Austin was last, and he was one of my favorite cousins, and usually the one that I talked to during family gatherings. Jonathan was all well and good, but he was almost a decade older than me. Austin and I grew up together, and we were the same age. If his parents had lived closer, we would have gone to school together. We had similar features, which made it obvious we were related but different enough to know we weren't siblings. The only glaring difference was he was clean-shaven, while I had a full beard. He had never been able to grow a good one. It wasn't connected and was patchy in some spots. Now that we had told each other what we were working with, a plan was made. It was relatively simple. Jack and I would be the front line with our shields, keeping the boar at bay, while Alice, Hal, and Kyle peppered it from a distance. That left Austin in the middle, where he would act if the boar got through us, and if it didn't, he would stab it with his spear from behind our shields. With the plan established, we continued on our trek. Using the tracking skill made it 100 times easier than without, and soon enough the snorting and huffing of a boar could be heard through the usual forest sounds of swaying branches and bird calls. "All right, let's do this, guys," Cal said, trying to pump us up. Chapter 7, First Hunt. "Hang on there, cowboy. What's the thing's level first?" Hal said while pulling Kyle back by the collar of his breastplate. "Oh, right, I forgot that you guys couldn't see it. It says that it's a level 5 Highland boar," Kyle said. "Okay, that's doable. The boss of the wave was a level 4, so this boar wasn't much higher than that. We also outnumbered it 6-1. We all also had double the amount of skills we had last time and double the amount of fighting experience. A small part of my brain thought that this was overkill, but the rational part that was looking ahead to the future where I would be putting a piece of wood between me and a 150 to 200 pound boar thought that there weren't enough people. Before the rational part of my brain could conjure up anything else on why this was a bad idea, I saw Hal give the signal. All of our ranged members fired off their attacks. We could all see the boar through the trees and we were roughly 30 yards out. The arrows were the first to hit, being faster than the ice bolt flying through the air. Kyle hit the front shoulder of the boar while Hal hit a couple of inches lower and over from where the front leg connected to the body. It was a perfect shot. If it was a deer, and you had an overpowered rifle that could get through the ribcage to pierce the heart. When the two arrows hit almost simultaneously, the boar went wild. It jerked so hard to the side that Alice's ice bolt missed completely. After being attacked, the boar instantly noticed us and started charging towards us. Staring at an angry boar that was barreling its way towards me was a new experience, and not one that I was fond of. When we were initially planning how we were going to approach this, someone had the idea of jumping over the boar when it charged so it flew by underneath us. In this moment, I couldn't help but thank whatever god there was that we didn't decide on that plan. It didn't look very big from 30 yards away, but as it got closer we realized that it was a lot bigger than we thought it was. Standing at about 4.5 feet tall, I didn't think that I could jump over it even if I had springs on the bottom of my feet. Jack and I shared a look that said this was not the smartest thing we ever agreed to. But we marshaled up some courage and walked slowly to meet it. Now we weren't dumb enough to actually meet its charge. The plan was to dodge to the side at the last second to get the boar to run into the tree behind us. Kind of like they do at rodeos with bulls. It was something that Kyle had come up with and nobody had thought of a better idea. Watching it close the distance, I didn't know which part to be more scared of. The fact that much weight could move that fast, or the sound of breaking branches and hooves thumping rhythmically on the ground getting closer and closer. Jack and I both tensed, getting ready to leap to the side with all our might when an arrow hit right in the middle of the beast's forehead, sinking in less than an inch. That did not spell good news. If the arrows couldn't penetrate the head to kill it, the only way to kill it would be to get a lucky shot through the eye, or tire it out and stab it until it couldn't fight anymore. I could only hope that precision shot worked better than what I'd seen so far. Jack and I both dodged out of the way of the charge quick enough not to get hit, but the boar didn't continue on and ram into the tree behind us. It slowed and veered out of the way quicker than I thought possible with the amount of momentum that the thing had built up. If I hadn't witnessed it firsthand, I would have thought that it wasn't possible. With its charge broken, it was time for the next part of the plan where Jack and I held it in place so the ranged attackers could pepper it with attacks. I walked to one side of the beast while Jack walked to the other. We both had our shields up and braced with both hands, both hoping that the beast would turn and face the other. I even activated Fortified Body and felt my body strengthening with mana. My luck had run out apparently because the beast chose me. We were only standing a few feet from the thing, so it couldn't charge with a ton of force, but when the thing hit my shield it took everything in my power not to lose my footing. It was like standing still while a 200-pound linebacker got a 5-foot running start to smash into you. My higher center of gravity didn't help matters either. I only had to hold it for a few seconds before it turned around and tried to maul Jack. While I had been holding its attention, Jack had used his sword, powered with one of his skills, and carved a gash in its hind leg. The boar quickly turned and tried to skewer the person that had injured it. Jack fared much the same as I had and got pushed back a few feet but mostly held his ground. Seeing that now was my chance, I readied my axe to cut its back leg. After chopping trees for the past day and a half, I imagined that its leg was the trunk and I had to make my way through it. I had used Power Strike numerous times by now while chopping wood, so when my glowing axe broke the skin and hit bone, I was surprised at its sudden stop. This thing's bones are like stone. Power strike added a good amount of power behind my swings, and when I was already swinging as hard as I could, I expected that I would have been able to do more damage. The fight continued like that while Hal, Kyle, and Alice kept filling it with arrows or ice shards respectively. Austin didn't get to do much with the beast moving around as much as it did, but still got a few stabs in. Turns out that his attacks were the most effective. Whenever the subtly glowing spear would find flesh, it made its way a good distance in before it stopped. After pulling it out, blood would leak generously from the wound. We continued like that for a good 5 or so minutes before the fight changed. I was getting exhausted. My lungs hurt, my body hurt, and I couldn't bring in enough air with every breath, and I didn't think Jack was holding up any better. I could barely activate Power Strike anymore, and Fortified Body was out of the question. The boar was way worse off. Its hind legs were both injured with gashes in multiple places. It had over 25 arrows sticking out from various places along with ice shards, and a few deep puncture wounds with blood flowing freely out of them. I had been using Power Strike on its back legs every time it turned towards Jack, and he had been using skills of his own when it turned toward me. I could tell that its back legs were about to give out, which would sign its death certificate. If it couldn't move, it was dead for sure. The boar must have realized the same, because in a last-ditch effort it ran towards the one who had caused it the most pain, Austin. Austin had been keeping his distance for most of the fight and only coming in for an attack every once in a while. He was making sure that he was ready if the beast suddenly rushed towards the archers. So when the boar turned and charged in his direction, he was prepared. He braced his spear on the ground, and I could see him activate Fortified Body by the mana wafting off of him. The boar must have had a death wish, for it ignored the spear completely. It was going to take this annoying one with him to the grave. The spear penetrated deep into the boar's chest, but it didn't stop the boar completely. The charge landed, and Austin went flying back a few feet before landing on his back. I could hear him groan when he landed and could only hope nothing was broken. I turned to the boar, which had finally succumbed to its injuries and fell to the ground. The spear that was over a foot into its chest finally did the trick. Alice had run out of mana a while ago, and she was mostly just standing there, so when Austin went flying, she was the first to rush over to make sure he was okay. Now that the fight was over, the notification popped up in my vision. You have contributed in slaying Highland Boar. Level 5, 3 points earned. I scanned the notification quickly and then closed it. It took everything in me not to fall over from exhaustion. It was a deep exhaustion that felt like more than just muscle exhaustion, like something else was wrung out too. I shuffled over towards where Alice was kneeling over Austin, who was groaning on the ground. Groaning was a good sign. It meant he's still alive. How is he? I huffed out. No broken bones, luckily, but he has a puncture wound in his stomach. Alice responded. I inspected his stomach, and sure enough, blood was seeping out of a circular wound. One of the tusks must have caught him when the boar rammed him. I'm putting pressure on it, but there isn't much I can do until we get him to a healer. Why didn't one come with us? Alice said. You know why, Jack said before mimicking the voice of our granddad. If the unfortunate were to happen, we can't afford to lose any healers. It was a morbid thing to say to a group before they went hunting, but it was true. There were only 4 healers in the group, and losing one wouldn't be good. It didn't help that most of the healers were the mothers of the group who didn't wish to leave their kids. Looks like we'll have to carry him, Hal said while looking down at Austin. I don't know if I can carry myself back. I think I'm seeing spots, I said in between heavy panting for breath. I'll do it, plus I know the way back. You guys can carry the boar back after you catch your breath, Hal said while starting to pick Austin up in a fireman's carry. One of you knows how to get back, right? I knew, but Kyle beat me to it and gave his affirmation that he did. Hal didn't stick around long after that. Austin's wound wasn't immediately fatal, but waiting any longer wouldn't help things. Watching as Hal retreated into the forest, I basically flopped on the ground with a light groan. Jack followed my example, leaving Alice and Kyle standing. With nothing else to do, Kyle began removing the arrows from the boar and walking around the scene, picking up all the ones that missed. Knowing that if we were successful, There would have to be a way to get it back. We bought some rope from the pylon and brought a sturdy branch that we could tie it to. The only thing that we were waiting on was Jack and I getting enough energy to be able to carry it back. We rested for about 15 minutes before we got up any longer, and I felt that I would fall asleep. The trip back was not enjoyable, but with 4 people switching out to help carry it, it was doable. It took double the amount of time that it would have taken without lugging the creature with us. When we got back, there were some cheers of congratulations, but there were some looks from people who thought that it was reckless. Austin's mom gave us a particularly nasty look, but she was never very pleasant to begin with. Austin was all patched up by the time we got back, but the nurses kept him on bed rest. It's amazing what magic can do. If that had happened before, it would have taken surgery and weeks of bed rest and rehab before it was healed. Based on the look on Austin's face, he did not appreciate all the people fussing over him. I could hear him trying to explain that he was fine and there wasn't even a wound anymore. It all fell on deaf ears though. Hal already told the story of how it went, but all of us got asked again anyway. My sister came to check on me personally to make sure that I was fine before moving on and checking the others. All I had were small cuts and scrapes. Jack was most of the same while Alice was just out of mana. Kyle was the best off with nothing wrong. I was just glad that I didn't have to eat rabbit again for dinner. The boar tasted fantastic. Someone ended up springing for some seasoning from the store to add on, which really hit the spot. I think it was my Uncle Mark. I could see him arguing that it would be a crime to do without. He took his grilling seriously. All said and done, I would say that it was a successful hunt. After adding up the points that we all got showed that it was worth a total of 25 points. Everyone got 3 except for Austin, who got 10. I guess getting the killing blow gets you more. I think that everyone was happy not to have dried rabbit again, and the boar was so good there was barely any left after the feast. I went to bed with a tired body and full stomach and was out like a light. The start of the 4th day was the same as the previous 3. Contemplating whether buying coffee from the shop was worth it. It wasn't, but I still thought about it before getting up for the day. A notification revealed I got an increase in wisdom from training. The fight was the first time that I had run out of mana, so that must be how you train that. I made a note to use my skills more during the day to help in training the magic-related stats. Since we had an excess of felled trees, my job switched to cutting them into planks or other workable shapes. 2x4s for framing and 4x4s for posts were the most common. We didn't have any tape measures, so we used a stick that had notches cut into it to measure. It wasn't very precise, but that wasn't strictly necessary. The funny thing was that I was pretty sure our planks were closer to 2 inches by 4 inches than the ones bought from the store. The joking and happy attitude all changed around noon when we all got a notification. Defend your claim. Wave start 0:59. It was the same notification and timer as the first time. Everyone who was out came sprinting back to camp. Some of the little ones started crying, and the whole camp was a flurry of activity. No one was too far out from camp, likely already on their way back anticipating lunch in the coming minutes. Everyone did a count to make sure that we weren't missing anybody, which came back clear. Not knowing which direction the wave was going to come from, we assumed the same formation as last time, in a loose circle around the pylon. The timer ran down, and a minute later it hit 0. It was an eerie quiet while everyone searched the horizon for which direction we were going to get attacked. After some shouting in the section facing south, we had our answer. All of us shifted position to be in the same formation as last time, except this time facing south instead of east. It was a lot easier to see the enemy this time due to the fewer hills in the south and the slight decline in height from here to the forest. Coming out of the forest was a mass of small animals, easily more than the last wave. Last time there were around 50 rabbits along with the boss, and this time there looked to be 60 or 70 of the things. "Kyle!" Grandfather shouted, trying to get Kyle to relay the information on what they were. "It's a mix of level 2 and 3 forest squirrels." "Any sign of the boss?" Granddad said. "Not yet. I haven't seen anything," Kyle replied. Took a few moments, but Kyle spotted the boss not long after. It was a level 6 forest squirrel that looked like it had a mix of rabies and steroids in its system. The wave proceeded much the same as last time. We waited for them to get into range, and the rangers fired, followed by the mages. The practice helped the accuracy tremendously. It went from atrocious to just below average. Hal was the best, but I figured it was his skill precision shot more than anything. There was a surprise when I saw one of the arrows split in two mid-air before coming down and hitting the ground. I didn't know that was possible. It turned out to be the last ranger's new skill, splitting shot. My Aunt Carrie was the last ranger of the three that we had, and I didn't talk with her much. The new skill was a surprise. It made the volleys that much more deadly, and at this point, every little bit helped. The practice really showed its worth when the mages started firing off their spells. With 11 projectiles being fired off, all with decent accuracy, the casualties started adding up for the squirrels. Even though there were more enemies than the last wave, since the ranged support killed more of them before they got to us, I was facing down the same, if not a lower number of enemies as last time. I reverted to the tried and true method of focusing on defense and only attacking when an opportunity presented itself. It was easier to defend against the leading charge of the little creatures because they didn't have the powerful back legs that the rabbits had to launch themselves at us. What they did have going for them was they were impossible to get off. One of them got inside of my shield and it attached itself to my leg and started going to town, scratching the shit out of it. It didn't do much to the armor, but where claws met skin it drew bloody lines. It was death by 1,000 cuts if it was packed in a small 2-foot ball of furry death. I had never seen a squirrel so berserk in my life. There had to be something doing this to them. I didn't get much time to debate the reasons behind their attitude with them trying to claw me to death, so I shook the thought from my head and focused on the task at hand. While getting scratched was painful, it wasn't immediately life-threatening. My biggest worry was letting more of these things attach themselves to me. I activated Fortified Body, and the pain lessened from the scratches doing less damage. I put all my attention towards warding the things off. I got a few decent swipes in with my axe but didn't make the same mistake as last time, overcommitting with my swing to open myself up to counterattacks. After the initial charge and defense, all of the little buggers had picked their targets and scrambled toward them. With the reduction in numbers, there wasn't enough to overwhelm us. If someone had gotten singled out and ganged up on, it wouldn't have been a good time though. We did most the same as last time and took them down a little at a time. During the fighting, I got time to reach down and grab the bundle of fury that was on me, and I dealt with that one personally. I realized I may have used a bit too much force when its body exploded from my swing. I activated Power Strike, subconsciously to deal with the menace. I may have taken my anger out on it, but the thing was the cause of it, so I felt justified. The rest of the fight went most of the same way, and anyone that didn't have an enemy helped others, and soon enough the only one left was the boss. The ranged attacks focused on it, and being surrounded as it was, it didn't last long. With the battle finished, the notifications rolled in. You have contributed in slaying Forest Squirrel, level 3 3 points earned. You have slain Forest Squirrel, level 2, for points earned. You have contributed in slaying Forest Squirrel, level 2 4 points earned. You have contributed in slaying Corrupted Forest Squirrel, level 6 3 points earned. You have successfully defended your claim. Extra experience awarded. 40 points to all who participated. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Skimming over them revealed a lot more points than the previous wave. Counting them up showed that I got 75 just myself. The notification said that everyone got 40 points for a successful defense. Added together for all 30 of us was 1,200 points just from that. I saved those thoughts for later and limped over to where the healers were and waited for my turn to be treated. My aunt, who was a nurse before this, was going around checking on everyone's injuries and giving them priorities based on severity, and mine weren't critical, so I had to wait my turn. Everyone on the front lines had varying levels of scratches and wounds, but nothing that was life-threatening. The healers could only cast their spell 6 or 7 times before running out of mana, but there were 4 healers for the dozen people who were injured. Even if every injury took a couple of casts to fix, there wouldn't be an issue. After I got healed, I lost my excuse to not help with cleaning up. Moving bodies turned out to be just as fun as the last time I did it, which was none at all. Guess I have to get to it. Chapter 8 Preparations. I woke to the glow of the rising sun, birds chirping and the wind making branches sway. Day 5. I could hear others already awake walking around and the clinking of pots and pans. Sitting up, I took a minute to take in the view. The sun was already in the sky, so I didn't get to see the sunrise, but it was still beautiful nonetheless. Facing the sun in the east with the mountains to the north and the forest to the south made it seem like it was a scene from a movie. Wait, does the sun still rise in the east? The map from the beginning showed that it was east, but if we weren't on Earth anymore, then I couldn't take it as a fact. What's got you thinking so deeply this early in the morning? I'm surprised you're even up given the hour. I turned to see my dad walking over with a cup of something in his hand. He must have seen my facial expression morph from thoughtful to excited, so he added, "It's water. You've seen how expensive luxury goods are. It's not worth it. It should be against the law to deny someone their coffee." That was another thing that was odd about the way that the store organized what tab each good was under. Since coffee wasn't a food and not necessary for survival, it was labeled a luxury good. Not only did it have the price of a luxury good, it was also classified as a stimulant from the caffeine, and that carried its own added price. You would think there was a discount since it was technically addictive, but no, that would be too generous. "I'm not sure there are any laws anymore," he said, taking a seat next to me to share in facing the view. I didn't even think about that. How many people have already died from this? How many people are gonna die before this is over? There won't be a government to come back to, so who's gonna enforce the law? I guess it's gonna come down to whoever has the biggest stick. He must have known where my mind was going, so he spoke again to cut it off. "I didn't come over here to have that conversation. That's for another time. What were you thinking about before I said anything?" "What?" "Oh, I was thinking about how we don't know if the sun still rises in the east," I said. He must have found my thoughts funny because he started laughing when I told him. "What? What's so funny?" I asked. "Only you would think something like that right now. Most of us are trying to figure out how we are going to survive and protect our children while you're over here pondering about the universe," he said, still chuckling to himself. "Everything that we can change we are already working on changing, and anything we can't, well, that's not really worth getting worked up about. You know what saying I'm talking about?" I couldn't remember the exact words to the quote I was talking about, but he should know what I was referring to. My thoughts were simple. If it was something that we couldn't change, it wasn't worth the effort to fret over it. I couldn't send us back home. I didn't know any more than the next guy about what was in store for us. I was never the kind of person to worry about that kind of thing. I left that to my sister. "I know you think that way, but aren't you worried about our safety? What if the next wave isn't as easy as the others? What if someone gets hurt? Or worse?" I could tell he was worried. It was in his tone and the way he spoke. "What can we do differently, though? The only thing I can think of is to go off hunting every animal we come across, trying to level up, but I think that will lead us to an early grave faster than doing nothing will," I said. "I know, son, but it feels like we aren't doing enough." He sighed and shook his head. "We don't even know what we are doing. What does leveling up even mean? Is that what we should be doing, out leveling up as quickly as we can?" I said while gesturing towards the forest. "There is still too much we don't know to be jumping to conclusions." "Ha! You would think that you were the older one here," he said. "Since we are talking about the future, what are we going to do when others come?" I mentioned, trying to figure out if there were any plans toward the other participants in this tutorial. "I don't know, son," he repeated in a quieter tone. "I don't know." The conversation lapsed into silence after that. We just sat in silence and took in the view. Not soon after, breakfast was ready and we got up to start our day. "You know, it's actually a prayer," he said before I could walk away. "What?" I turned back around to face him with a questioning look on my face. I didn't know what he was talking about. "The saying you were referencing earlier, it's a prayer," he said before retelling the full saying I had forgotten. "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference." I made a face at that revelation. He knew how I felt about religion. We had discussed it in depth multiple times over the years, and my stance never changed. I wasn't a fan of knowing that it was a prayer and not a saying, but the message was good nonetheless. "You know what I mean," I shot back. He just laughed and walked away. With the influx in the amount of points from the second wave, I could see more things that were bought from the store. Extra clothes, soap, and toiletries were the most common. I spent some of my points and got some myself. Altogether they weren't that expensive, being around 20 points total, but when that was the equivalent of hunting a level 5 animal alone, it made it seem expensive. With the second wave, there were enough data points to confidently say that the amount of points earned was the level squared. A level 1 animal gave 1 point, a level 2 gave 4, and so on. If it was taken down as a group, the points were split between the attackers, with the lion's share going to the person who dealt the killing blow. With that mystery solved, it showed that if things kept going the way they were, points weren't going to be as scarce as we thought. Everyone got around 15 from the first wave, and that was with level 1 or 2 enemies. The second wave had level 2 and 3 enemies and gave 40 points for clearing the wave. The initial timeline of getting the wall in 25 waves was going to have to be revised. Right now, the progress sat at 1:56/5:0:0:0. At this rate, we would get the wall in a few more waves. What no one was mentioning was the fact that the beast's level would also keep increasing. Not everyone leveled during this last wave. Most of us made it to level 3, but some didn't. Everyone could see the writing on the wall. We were already outnumbered every wave, and soon we would also be outleveled. Something would have to change. Time ticked on, days flowed into nights and back into days. We continued working throughout. I did different things during the day, from my usual gathering of wood to helping with construction when that crew needed manpower. I also found the time to go on a few more hunting trips. The bear was found to be too high at level of 15, so we tabled the discussion of hunting it. Other beasts were fair game. There were a few more boars that met their end, along with a few birds which were around level 4 that started to attack the scouts when they went out. There were a few bats that came out when the sun set that were getting too close to the camp that we had to put down. Thankfully there was a healer with cleanse, because the smell of blood would have attracted a number of beasts that we could do without. She had the job of using it on all the food before we ate to make sure there weren't any viruses or similar diseases. That was definitely a skill that I was going to purchase if I could get the points for it. The construction crew since the start of the tutorial made a smokehouse, several lean-to structures for shelter, and several different spikes to help with the defense during the waves. One of which, if the pattern holds, is set for today. They also dug a hole and constructed an outhouse which, in the 21st century, I never thought I would find myself using. We bathed in the river with some makeshift walls for privacy, but really they were one strong wind away from a communal bath. The one good thing about all this was that the kids were loving it. They treated it as if it was a vacation and the whole family was camping in the woods. They fussed over the food and the sleeping arrangements, but what kid doesn't? Their laughter and playing took away from the subtle tension in the air, the uncertainty of the wave that was to come. We were more prepared for this wave than any of the others. We had experienced 2 waves previously, and we have some defenses to help this time. They weren't as sturdy as they could have been, but they had to be movable since we didn't know which direction they were needed in. The first wave came from the east and the second from the south. We couldn't be certain that the pattern would continue being clockwise and come from the west. It wasn't a risk that we were willing to take being wrong, so we made them movable. Another thing that we prepared for the upcoming wave were rocks and javelins for the warriors to throw before the wave closed in. With the steady increase in strength from leveling and training, the average warrior sat at around 15 points in strength. Now that was by no means superhuman, but it was enough to do considerable damage with a rock or sharp projectile. There was no way to measure, but it felt like we were at what used to be the peak of the human body in terms of strength. We could lift things by ourselves that took 2 or 3 people to lift when we first got here. It was like being an Olympic athlete. The rogues had the highest increase in agility and they could move surprisingly quickly. One of them even made the joke that he could beat Usain Bolt in a race until we informed him that the sprinter most likely got the same increase in ability from leveling as well. That took the wind out of his sails. Now that we had some idea of what we were preparing for, the work moved a lot faster. The 2 days in between waves flew by. From the combination of labor and hunting, I got an increase in strength and endurance. Some of the construction required some more detailed work with whittling wood into notches and joints so everything would fit together. Every non-ranged fighter had 3 javelins that were of about wrist thickness, maybe a little less, and 4 feet long, for a total of around 60. Smoothing the sides and sharpening the tip took a lot of time and effort, which gave a point of agility. That was the first time that I had gotten a point of agility, which was good news. After I found out that wisdom increased with the use of mana, I made sure to use them frequently, making sure that I was never full on mana, wasting a chance to train. Sensing mana was still beyond my ability, so knowing how much mana I had was difficult, but there was a discussion about it, and a few of the mages had a better grasp of it than the rest of us did. They said it was more of a feeling than anything else. It wasn't like hunger or thirst, but you could tell when you were full. There was a feeling that came with it, just like there was a feeling of extreme exhaustion when you ran out of mana. After using a skill and waiting for my mana to top off, I got a vague sense of what they were talking about. It took me most of the day and a decent amount of tries, but I could tell when I was full now, and that was progress. I was by no means the best at it, and if I was being honest, I wasn't even average. The mages could actively gauge how much they had and how many attacks they had left in the tank. Some of the warriors could even do the same after practicing it. With our constant experiments, we found out how to train the rest of the stats. Strength was obvious, increasing through strenuous activity. Agility could be increased through fine motor activity like carving, or through quick bursts of movement like sprinting. Perception training was the most esoteric. It wasn't just eyesight that the stat governed. There was a magical side to it as well that someone found out through meditation of all things. When using the skill to replenish mana quicker, they tried extending their senses out, trying to see the mana in the air. That got them an increase of perception that no one has been able to replicate since. Fortitude and vitality were tied together somewhat. Fortitude was increased through training the body to withstand injuries, reminiscent of walking on coals. No one was that extreme here, but there were more than a few injuries that trained fortitude during our stay here. Vitality increased through healing injuries naturally, so they often increased together. The three magical stats were all tied with mana usage, I know, shocker. In some way, wisdom was the easiest, only requiring use. We figured that it was like a muscle, and the more you stressed it, it would grow. We still couldn't figure out how much bigger our mana pool was per point of increase. The mages with the best sense for it couldn't get an accurate judgment. Acumen could be trained by cycling mana throughout the body in different loops and circuits, or by trying to manually pull in mana from the surroundings. I failed at both, so I was still not sure I got what I was supposed to be doing. Intelligence was trained with various magical activities, most of which I couldn't perform. The mages trained by forming the skill for whatever attack they had, but holding it for as long as they could before releasing it. It became harder and harder to keep the skill from unraveling that trained the stat. Warriors had it harder without any attack skills to use. All of our skills started with activation. There was no delaying. So instead of delaying activation, we trained to extend the duration of our skills. My skill power strike specifically didn't last very long, maybe a few seconds total. Keeping the skill activated took a decent amount of effort and was the best way of training intelligence for me personally. It also had the added effect of helping get used to the skill and learning its ins and outs. In addition to our usual hour of training each day, which was mostly sparring and mock battles of varying amounts of people on each side, we added in different exercises to train stats during the day while we could. Using skills throughout the day in different manners trained most of the magical ones, and the hard work trained strength and endurance. Not many people wanted to train fortitude and vitality, but there were a few who attempted to. I was not one of them. I took some time at any point in the day to do some exercises for agility and perception so they weren't left out. When tallied up over the past 2 days, I got an increase in strength, agility, endurance, and wisdom. I felt good about the increases and couldn't wait to keep going. It was kind of addicting watching the numbers going up and feeling the difference in my body. I brought up my status sheet to review my progress. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, human. Age, class, warrior, level 3. Profession, none. Faction, Zelensky family, temporary. Strength 17. Agility 8. Perception 10. Fortitude 11. Endurance 12. Vitality 12. Intelligence 8. Wisdom 7. Acumen 6. Free points 1. Laws none. Skills power strike, fortified body. Coins 0. Points 37. Seeing the visible change was gratifying, but not as good as the change in my body. I felt strong in a way I've never before. I slimmed down and had biceps that could be prominently seen. I didn't have a six-pack or abs, but I could feel my core muscles were there. Looking over my status sheet, I noticed I forgot to place my free point from my last level. After thinking about it a bit, I placed it in agility. When it increased to 8, I noticed that swinging my axe was easier to get right, and it made recovering from mistakes far easier. I also didn't know if I would run into issues if my stats got too far apart. Everyone did light work in the morning and tried not to venture too far away from the camp just in case the wave started early. Didn't. Noon rolled around and we all heard the notification. Defend your claim. Wave start. 0:59. Well, let's get this over with. Chapter 9, Third Wave. The wave started the same as the others had, with a wave of beasts coming from one direction. By this point, we had discussed what we were to do and everyone had their assigned roles. I was part of the group that was in charge of moving the spikes into place and anchoring them into the ground to make sure they wouldn't move. Everything was already planned out ahead of time and every direction had markers for where they were to be placed. We even practiced doing it during training a few times to make sure we could do it quickly and efficiently. Granddad was nothing if not thorough. With the direction known, we all got to work moving everything to the west. People were shouting in the background and people moving back and forth getting everything pointed in the right direction and ready. My dad and I carried our section of spikes into place and used the back of our axes to hammer it into the ground. The anchors were about a foot long and made sure that it stayed in place no matter what rammed it. The angle of the spikes made it unlikely, but safety measures were in order. In under 2 minutes, we had set everything up and were ready to go. The mass of bodies wasn't even close to being in firing range, so we had time to spare. We couldn't carry both the spike wall and the javelins, so some of the older kids were tasked with taking the javelins to every warrior on the front lines. Anna ran up to me carrying a bundle of javelins, huffing from exertion. "Here you go, Uncle Topher," Anna chirped. "Why, thank you," I said while grabbing 3 of them off of her stack. I stuck 2 of them in the ground beside my right foot for easy retrieval, while keeping 1 in my hand. Anna then scurried over to my dad. "Here you go, Pawpaw." "Thank you, little one," he said while patting her head. He then relieved Anna from a portion of her stack and copied my actions. She moved on down the line, and after her stack ran out, she ran back to the shelters we had built for the noncombatants. That was a subject of hot debate, what to do with the kids. Some of the older kids, being in the 10 to 12 range, wanted to help but their parents vehemently refused. There was not a chance of them participating in the fight. The extent of what they were allowed was to help run little things around before the wave got started, like javelins or arrows. The shelter that was built for them was the most sturdy of anything that we had built so far, and had a lot of work put into it to make sure that nothing would be able to get through. We used whole logs for the sides and set them deep into the earth. There was no way anything was getting through. It all started when a parent was worried that something would get by us and target the kids, which led to a discussion about the possibility of flyers or something extremely quick that could run past the defenses. There was a slight panic as more and more ideas were thrown out, but Granddad squashed the fervor when he suggested the bunker-like shelter so the kids would stay safe. Took a lot of work and multiple hours of toiling and everyone chipping in, but it was done. The parents were especially happy that the kids were safe. It also had the added benefit that the kids didn't have to watch us slaughtering animals. Level 3 and 4 white-tailed deer, numbers around 80. Boss is a level 8 white-tail buck. The boss is about 5 feet tall and looks twice as strong as the normal deer. It also has an impressive rack with what look like sharp spikes pointing forward. Kyle shouted out so everyone could hear. That was another thing that was discussed. Granddad tasked Kyle with the job of relaying the pertinent information about the wave to everyone. Level, estimated numbers, and boss description were what was decided to be the most important. It was a good thing that we made the spike walls because I'm not sure if we could have taken a head-on charge from that amount of mass. The spikes should hold, should being the key word there, at least for the initial charge. What proceeded was the same as the last wave, with rangers firing first when the deer were around 90 to 100 yards out. The mages unleashed their volley when the deer were 50 to 60 yards out. They were a good amount better at hitting shots from that distance than a week ago. Watching a deer go down from the combined firepower of the magic projectiles was a sight to behold. After dying, the body didn't just fall over, it dug into the earth while flipping over itself, skipping along the ground before coming to a rest. Dirt and sod went flying everywhere, along with blood and body parts when the explosion was especially violent. The body dug grooves into the ground that dug up the grass, leaving furrows multiple feet long. The best part was the deer behind them couldn't stop in time and tripped over the bodies in front of them, flopping around and trying to get back to their feet. It didn't stop the charge of bodies coming toward us, but it blunted some of it. The mages and rangers continued until the deer reached the first marker in the field. It was placed early this morning when we were training our javelin throws. With our strength, we could throw somewhat accurately to about 100 feet. We couldn't hit a specific deer, but the collective throws of all of us would hit something. We practiced our throwing and placed markers at different distances to help judge the distance needed. We had one at 100 feet where we would release the first volley, along with another at 75 and 50. Inside of 50 wasn't necessary, we could judge that distance fine. Depending on how fast the beasts of the wave were, the second volley would be somewhere between the last two markers. The last javelin was for right before we needed to ready our weapons. When the deer hit the 100-foot marker, "Fire!" Granddad bellowed. All of us threw when he gave the order, the same as we had practiced. While the projectiles were in the air, we all retrieved our next one before looking up to watch. It was glorious. For a moment in time, there were 4 arrows accompanied by 7 magic bolts of varying elements and 20 javelins flying through the air together. It was cool to watch. I felt like I was in a fantasy movie standing on a castle wall watching an arrow volley get loosed. Yes, there were only 30-ish projectiles, but it was cool all the same. When they landed, it caused even more of the deer to fall, with the effect cascading to those behind them. I heard a chime, which meant that I must have got one of them. The second volley was soon in the air, and the scene repeated itself, quickly followed by the third. We whittled down the number of enemies by a third, and more than half had various injuries with arrows and javelins sticking out of them. Some had signs of magical damage with scorch marks, ice shards, or different injuries. After the last projectile was loosed, I unsheathed my axe and readied my shield. I was standing behind a row of spikes, ready to get this over with. As they got closer and closer, I found myself starting to get excited. I wasn't afraid of the charging beasts. I was ready to start swinging my axe at anything that came in range. I was confident the spikes would hold. I had helped make them and knew how heavy-duty they were. It was a stark difference from when the tutorial started a week ago, when nerves were making me sweat and rethink everything. There was none of that now. I was ready for what was to come. We trained this countless times over the past week. Now was the time to do it for real. The leading deer ran straight into the spikes and ran themselves through. The deer following them pushed them deeper onto the spikes, leading to their doom, sealing their fate. After the charge broke, we ran in between the gaps in the sections and started attacking. I charged through the spikes and landed a full power swing with power strike to a deer's leg and crippled the limb. I could hear the bone break. I repeated the action to the other leg and the same thing happened. With the deer effectively out of the fight, I moved on to another enemy. I waded through the torn-up earth with the rest of my family fighting for our lives. Something in me was waking up. I could feel a heat in me that I never had before. I was having more fun now than riding a roller coaster at an amusement park. I don't know if it was a mixture of nerves finally breaking or whether I was truly enjoying battle. I was sliding in between attacks like what a veteran warrior would. Felt like I was unstoppable. That all ended when I spotted the 5-foot, muscled form of the boss charging straight at me with its horns leading the charge. There was no time to dodge, and I wasn't fast enough to turn and flee. I got too reckless, and this was gonna hurt. I was overconfident. Well, shit, I muttered as I lowered my stance and braced my shield for the impact to come. It hit me like a runaway train, and even though I had fortified body activated, I went flying. I could feel my arm break when the force impacted my shield. The pain didn't set in immediately because of the shock, and the adrenaline kept me conscious as I weightlessly sailed through the air, staring up at the clear blue sky. There isn't a cloud in the sky, was the only thought I had before the ground came up and hit me hard. It knocked the breath out of me and left me gasping trying to get it back. I couldn't move my left arm, nor most of my body. The most I could do was turn slightly as if to roll over. My whole body hurt and I wasn't in a rush to add to the pain, so I stayed still. My axe was lost at some point in my travels and my shield was only attached by sheer luck. I heard a scream before I landed, but couldn't tell where it was coming from. Soon I could feel a soothing energy throughout my body, and I opened my eyes to two of the healers kneeling over me. His legs are moving, so it doesn't seem like he broke his back. One of them said. When I hit the ground, my head whipped back from the impact, so I couldn't see straight right now. I couldn't tell which of my family members it was. I could only guess from the voice. Did you see him land? He definitely has a concussion. The other healer said, and his arm is definitely broken. You know what we have to do? Reduce the swelling in the head and we'll deal with the rest after this is over. The first healer said that I was pretty sure was my Aunt Sam. We weren't related by blood, but she married my uncle years before I was born, so it never really mattered. We were closer than some of my relatives on my mother's side. She had been a nurse for decades and recently retired after turning 60. Now she did different things and various jobs until the time came to actually retire. Well, I guess not anymore. The other healer was her daughter Ashley. She had taken after her mother and went into the nursing field after getting her degree. She was currently a nurse at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and had the rare off day to attend the family gathering. I know what to do, Ashley said in an exasperated tone. The soothing energies soon concentrated on my head, and I could feel the grogginess going away and my vision clearing up. Felt relaxing and took my mind away from the pain briefly. As soon as it started, the energy stopped. Ugh, hi. I let out a groan as the pain reasserted itself. Oh, be quiet you, what did you think was going to happen? You're lucky you aren't dead. If it was any worse, we'd be scraping your splattered body off the ground. Being stupid never helped anybody. Sam chastised me. I was laying here with a broken arm and the remnants of a concussion, and she still took the time to berate me. She's always been like that, trying to beat out the stupid ideas from my thick skull. She would always tell stories of babysitting Austin and me when we were younger and we acted like hooligans, always up to no good. There was a saying that she always brought up around us. I would know something was wrong if it was quiet. It was never quiet with you two around. Before Ashley could start up her skill again, Sam interrupted her. That's enough. There's nothing life-threatening. I used body scan and there wasn't any internal bleeding. We should save our mana in case something worse happens. What? We should just leave him here like this? Ashley sounded perplexed. We'll come back when this is over. He won't die between then and now, Sam said. I could hear them get up and walk away after leaving me with that cheery thought. I didn't blame them. It was my own stupid fault. I didn't know if the cause was a lapse in judgment or a deeper feeling of heroism, but I knew I wouldn't be doing that again. The small amount of healing I received got rid of the ringing in my head, and I was left staring up into the sky while I heard the sounds of battle around me. I felt useless, and it didn't make me feel good. I have to get better. I couldn't keep making stupid mistakes like this. I was fortunate that the mistakes that I'd already made hadn't led to serious consequences. A broken arm was serious, but not as bad as it could have been. The realization that I could have died weighed heavy on my mind. The sounds of battle got quieter and less frequent before ending completely. It was about 15 minutes after the noise stopped that the first healer came over to me. In the meantime, I opened up the notifications that I received. You have slain white-tailed deer, level 4. 16 points earned. You have contributed in slaying white-tailed deer, level 4. 6 points earned. You have slain white-tailed deer, level 3. 9 points earned. You have contributed. You have successfully defended your claim. Extra experience awarded. 90 points to all who participated. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Skills available. The energy moving throughout my body took my mind off the pain. I could feel it improving my body, strengthening it. It didn't heal anything, but I figured the increased vitality helped all the same. I added my free point into vitality for the same reason. Looking at the points, I noticed that altogether I added another 131 points to my total. I didn't get any participation for the boss, unfortunately. That was 64 points split between whoever killed it. Usually, it was split so many ways the only person who got anything worthwhile was the person who landed the killing blow. We had built makeshift stretchers with some branches and cloth that were bought from the store that some of the non-injured fighters helped roll me onto before lifting me. I was brought to the hospital that we built, which was really a tent that was kept clean with a heavy usage of cleanse. There were a lot more injuries than the last 2 waves, and the structure was crowded with people moving about with bandages and glowing hands. I wasn't currently bleeding, and other people had puncture wounds or other wounds that were oozing blood who were seen to first. With the severity of all the injuries, the healers ran out of mana. It was the first time that the healers had run out of mana, and that made people panic. There was some yelling and cries of alarm before a loud voice cut through the rest. "Everybody who isn't injured, get out!" Sam's voice drowned out everyone else's. She said it with such authority that they couldn't help but comply and quickly began making their way out of the tent. In the same way that Granddad had the drill instructor tone when giving orders, Sam had the same for running a hospital. Came from experience. The tent wasn't soundproof, so when everyone who wasn't injured left, the discussion started again right outside. When some of us reached level 4, it revealed the next skill options. People were saying that the healers should be forced to take meditation so their mana regeneration would increase. That quickly got shut down when the knowledge of how healers leveled came out. I had never asked or wondered how they leveled. I figured they leveled like all the rest of us, from killing things. But my Uncle Mark, who was married to Sam, told everyone. Sam told me that they don't gain levels from just standing there. We have already figured out that you only get experience from a beast that you were involved in slaying. They didn't participate in the fight except to throw something at the beginning. Their experience comes from healing people after the battle, and since that hasn't finished yet. They haven't gotten their next level yet, so they won't be able to get a new skill. Mark said to the group. That was not ideal. If they couldn't get meditate, it would take longer to regenerate their mana, and if it took them longer to regenerate mana, it would take longer to heal everyone. If it took longer to heal everyone, I would have to lay here with a broken arm for far longer than I thought I would. Fuck me. Chapter 10 Mending. It had been a long day. The constant pain didn't help matters. After the wave finished, around 1 in the afternoon, the healers were in a state of constant activity. All 4 of them had experience in the medical field, and when their mana ran out, they turned to more mundane treatments for injuries. They sewed up wounds, set broken bones, applied tourniquets where required, and elevated limbs to reduce swelling. The collective experience of all of them was not small. Most had easy enough injuries that a cast or 2 of healing fixed them right up, just like in the previous waves. It was the handful of more serious injuries that were the problem. Scott, my father's youngest brother, had a deer stomp down on his foot which crushed some of the bones. He couldn't walk on it, and it looked red and angry when his boot was cut off. Jonathan had a deer roll up onto his leg after it had died, and it bent his leg in a direction it was not designed to go. After Sam's body scan, it was revealed that he dislocated his kneecap along with tearing just about every ligament in the knee. His ACL and MCL were obliterated. After his kneecap was put back into place, he could technically walk, but with nothing to support his knee, it would just pop back out again. Also, putting weight on it was extremely painful. I wasn't the only one who broke an arm, as there was another who held that honor. Mitchie, or Mitchell, as he hated that childhood nickname, had a deer collide with his side. He didn't have a shield to blunt the impact and wielded twin daggers from his rogue class, so his arm took the brunt of the force before snapping. There were other more serious injuries, but nothing as severe as those. The healers worked to stop the bleeding of the numerous puncture wounds first. Then after that was taken care of, they moved on to other minor injuries. They had tried to use their skill to try and repair the bone before they noticed it wasn't as effective as normal. 2 casts of the skill healed up most wounds fine, but that was when the only healing that was needed was to close the wound and repair the damaged muscle underneath. Some of the energy went towards clotting the blood and sealing the wound, but it was used more to speed up the body's natural process than to take over and do it for the body. That left the repairing of bones, a strenuous and resource-intensive undertaking that took time. When all but the 4 of us were healed, half of the healers received their 4th level, unlocking another skill option. The discussion about which skill they should take resurfaced. People were getting heated, and some of the comments stuck out from the rest by how loud they were. What would have happened if they ran out of mana and someone bled out? They should take meditation so that doesn't happen. The other options don't matter if they don't have the mana to heal. Then they're worthless. Who are we to dictate what they can or can't take as a skill? How would you feel if we forced you to take a specific skill? If it was for the greater good, I would do it, no questions asked. Yes, but who decides which skills are for the greater good? Should we listen to you with your 2 divorces and a kid who doesn't speak to you? Oh, that was a low blow. That was a sore spot for Uncle Braden. He went through a rough patch in life after those events unfolded. After his second divorce, there was a lengthy and brutal legal battle about custody of the child they shared. He ended up losing his house, lost the custody battle, and had to pay child support and alimony for years. His ex-wife remarried a few years later, and his daughter turned 18 not long after, so he didn't have to pay for long. But the damage was done. With only visitation and the occasional weekend, he saw his daughter a lot less. He picked up a second job and started working a lot more, and those weekend visits turned into holidays. After that, it wasn't very long until she asked him to stop coming. To this day, Braden claims his ex-wife turned her against him and poisoned her mind with lies. He was in a dark place for a while after that. He worked through it with a combination of therapy and drinking until pulling himself out of it. He then went on to marry his current wife, Rachel, and have his 2 sons, Hal and Kyle. Having not been born yet, I don't remember a time when he was like that. His first divorce was better and happened when he was really young. He married his high school sweetheart before they both went off to college. Suffice it to say, they grew apart and never really got better. That one was an amicable separation with no bad blood between the two. Since he was the only one in the family to get a divorce, let alone 2, whenever the siblings got into fights, it was used as a snide dig at him. Usually, when things got that far, my granddad would have to step in and sit them down before beating some sense into them. He would always say, "You don't hold grudges with family. You can fight and squabble, but I won't let you not speak to each other." It would take some time after that, but they worked through it. Being forced to come to frequent family gatherings did that. After that comment, it devolved into a screaming match. Uncle Mark, who made the comment, was the oldest of the 4 siblings, and he didn't take the fact that people were trying to dictate what his wife could and couldn't do very well. The air of civility that had lasted the week after the change finally broke. We had been trying to keep it together for the kids, limiting our yelling and working through our anger. That restraint was gone. Tempers flared, things were said, accusations were made, and fingers were pointed. You could probably hear us from the forest, it got so loud. Before it could get to blows, most of the participants in the argument stormed off. They left behind the bystanders who just looked at each other in uncomfortable silence. I didn't have to worry about what was going on long, as Ashley came up to me and lifted a paste under my nose that knocked me out into blissful sleep. Kyle used his foraging sense and found some plants that, when ground down into a paste, could be used as a painkiller in small quantities, or knock you out in larger ones. I was happy to get away from the pain and the yelling. I woke up the next morning in a much better condition than I thought possible. The pain was mostly gone, and my arm only hurt when I tried to flex or move my fingers. My arm was wrapped tightly with strips of cloth around sticks on either side to keep it straight and act as a splint. There was also a shoulder strap to complete the makeshift sling. I rolled out of the cot I was in to join in eating breakfast with a slight groan. My body was stiff from yesterday and didn't appreciate my moving around. Breakfast was uncharacteristically quiet and went by quickly. After most were finished eating and making their way towards wherever they were needed, Abigail came over and sat next to me. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I let out a chuckle before saying, "Like I went skydiving without a parachute." She smiled at that before asking, "Is there any pain? Can you feel your fingers?" "Only a dull pain, but I expected that, and yes, I can feel my fingers." I then proceeded to give her a one-finger salute to prove my point. She then went through a checklist of different questions, followed by poking and prodding different spots while asking if it hurt. I think she did some of them on purpose, as there was no way some of them were scientifically relevant. As she was one of the 2 healers who had reached level 4, I wanted to hear what she thought on the discussion earlier. "What do you think about your next skill?" I asked. Oh, don't even get me started. Everyone here can go pound sand. There is no way I'm letting any of y'all pick what skill I take. That being said, I already picked one, so it doesn't matter anyway. She seemed fed up by that topic, and some of her frustration came back again. She gave me a pointed look, daring me to say something. I may not be the best with women, but I know a trap when I see one, so I steered clear. Well, what did you get? No, I wasn't scared of my sister. It was a logical next question. Instead of answering, she put a hand on my broken arm, and I could feel an energy penetrate through my skin and muscles and settle into my bone. It started to itch and irritate the area around it. Hey, what are you doing? That's uncomfortable, I said, startled at the events. Shut up. I'm helping, she said. After she said that, I could feel the bone start to mend and put itself back together, fusing together where it was healed enough. It felt odd, like someone was lightly brushing my skin with a feather, but deeper. Just tell me what it is, I asked her. It's called mend bone. After we saw how inefficient healing a broken bone was, we searched for a way around that. There's also one specifically for other parts of the body. Muscles, organs, skin, you name it. There wasn't anything for regrowing limbs, so maybe stick to just breaking them. Abigail said. I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Next time I'll stop and ask the beast nicely to just break my arm and not detach it. I said sarcastically. Don't be a smart ass, you know what I meant. No regrowing limbs, so be careful. We think that it will be possible if we get to a higher level. I mean, with all the things we've already seen, the possibilities are endless, she said. We both took a second to fantasize about the future before she got up. All right, I have to get going. These cats won't wrangle themselves, she said, starting to walk away before turning back around. Oh, before I forget, go add your points to the wall. We need to see how many we got for this round. When we worked the math out, the next wave should give us enough, but I want to double check after this wave is totaled up. After saying her piece, she turned and walked away. I knew it was only going to be a few more waves before the wall was done, but I didn't think we were going to finish it so soon. Thinking deeper about it, it made sense. The first wave gave everyone 10 points for a total of 300. The second gave 40 each, for a total of 1,200. The third gave 90, for a total of 2,700. Summed up made it 4,200 just for wave completion, not including the points for killing the animals that came in the wave. When it was all totaled up, it was a staggering amount of points. Far from the first day where I was browsing the shop looking at all the cool things with my measly 15 points. I was under doctor's orders of bed rest, so when everyone got up to start working, I had nothing to do. I had enough free time yesterday to go over and review the battle, thinking of ways to improve and what to do differently. Any more would be nitpicking, so I turned to magic training. I spent most of the morning trying, mostly failing, to manipulate mana. I was making steady progress, so it wasn't hopeless. I also had a lot of time to think about my new skill choice and what to get. One of the things we had been trying to learn was if we could teach skills to others. There were multiple attempts to try and walk someone through the feeling a skill had when in use, but nothing worked. We could barely manipulate mana so far, and teaching a skill was quite wishful thinking. The idea was to all take different skills so we could teach them to each other, but that idea was scrapped after there weren't any results. Going back through the options revealed that there were just as many as the last time I looked through the list. I had an offensive skill in Power Strike and a defensive one in Fortified Body. That left my options open to pretty much anything. I could double down and get another defensive skill, but we were about to get walls after the next wave. I could get another striking skill like Sweeping Slash or Extended Blade, but the same reasoning came back. We were about to get walls next wave. I didn't know how many attacks I would do with my axe. Would I be behind the walls throwing javelins the whole time? Would I be defending the gate on the front lines? There was just too much I didn't know to make my decision easier. One thing that I knew for sure was that I would be throwing at least something every wave, and that solidified my decision. I chose Throwing Proficiency Beginner as my third skill. Throwing Weapons Beginner. Using basic proficiency with throwing weapons adds a minuscule bonus to the effect of agility and perception when using a fitting throwing weapon. There were the same numerous options as with melee weapon proficiency like axe throwing proficiency and javelin throwing proficiency, but I opted for the generic one so any weapon I threw would benefit. Whether I threw my axe, a knife, or the javelins, all would be boosted. Being at the beginner tier was a downside, but I would never improve if I never got the skill and practiced. I couldn't keep putting off long-term improvements for short-term benefits forever, and proficiency skills added a steady boost to every action during combat and didn't require mana to use. With the choice made, I closed all the system screens and got back to what I was doing before. Since I couldn't work, I was put on babysitting duty. I didn't have to watch all the kids by myself, as that would be a disaster. All of the injured people were helping with the kids. It was going to be a long day. End of chapter 10.